October 8th, 1985, marked the beginning of a string of brutal robberies that rocked South Florida. Two masked men used military weapons in a violent spree that threatened innocents. But no one knew who they were or where they would strike next. Before the FBI could stop them, lives would be lost, and law enforcement would be changed forever.
In Miami, a gang of robbers targeted banks and armored cars. They carried assault weapons and weren't afraid to use them. They struck during the day and sometimes twice a day. For a while, they seemed unstoppable. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. We knew that to stop these criminals would require stealth, ingenuity, and perhaps a little luck. No one expected to become one of the bloodiest chapters in FBI history.
Miami, Florida, 1985. To FBI agents, it seemed a city under siege. Each week, there were 3 to 5 bank robberies. Kidnappings, major drug deals, and shootings were everyday occurrences. But just when it seemed things couldn't get any worse, a new breed of outlaws hit the streets and turned the Miami crime wave into a war. On October 8th, an armored car courier made a scheduled pickup at a steak and ale restaurant. The driver waited for his partner to return, unaware that 2 heavily armed men were also waiting nearby. As the guard approached the rear of the truck, the gunman advanced with military-style precision.
Hold it! Come out! I can't. Open the door. Tell him to open the door.
The driver refused to open his door. He drove away, following company policy. The subjects retreated to a getaway car and attempted to camouflage their escape with a military-issue smoke grenade. The Metro-Dade County Police and the FBI responded to the scene. Robberies of armored cars and banks fall under FBI jurisdiction. The supervisor of the Miami FBI's Violent Crimes Unit was Special Agent Gordon McNeil.
There were basically no clues as far as who these individuals were. We had absolutely no idea, no way to go. No one had seen them without the black hoods over their faces. They wore gloves on both hands.
One piece of information witnesses did provide was the license number of the getaway car. Agents tracked the number and learned the car had been stolen a month before. But the lead was a dead end. The robbers had escaped with only $2,800. But their use of military weapons and commando tactics convinced Agent McNeil they would probably strike somewhere in Miami again. But where and when? The answer came just 8 days later. At a busy supermarket on South Dixie Highway, another armored car arrived to make a scheduled pickup. A courier returned to the truck with several money bags filled with cash and receipts. He never saw the car that came around the corner. robbers escaped empty-handed. Metro-Dade police and the FBI quickly responded to the alarm.
6 Adam 31, 1097.
These men were clearly not afraid to use deadly force. The courier would later die from his injury. While he was taken to the hospital, agents interviewed his partner. As he described the gunmen, it quickly became obvious they were probably the same men responsible for the previous robbery at the Steak and Ale restaurant.
There was no money taken in that particular robbery, but there were a number of shots fired. So the ante was still going up here as far as I was concerned because of the continued use of violence by these two individuals.
Ballistics evidence would further confirm the connection between the two robberies. Investigators found double-aught buckshot from a 12-gauge shotgun, 45 caliber bullet casings, and 223 shell casings. The 223s seemed most significant.
And the identification division of the firearms unit of the FBI laboratory compared those two shell casings and said they were fired from the same weapon. So we definitely had a link now between the Winn-Dixie attempt and the Steak and Ale robbery.
Two violent robberies were linked to the same masked gunman, but there were no leads to their identities. Because they had not scored any cash at the Winn-Dixie robbery and so little at the Steak and Ale, investigators were certain they would soon strike again. 2 weeks later, on Friday, November 8th, a third robbery occurred. This time a bank job at the Florida National Bank. As a teller and a guard walked from the main building to the drive-thru, two masked gunmen emerged from a car. At gunpoint, they ordered the teller to open the door to the drive-thru.
Get it open now!
She tried to comply, but there was a problem with the key.
Hurry up!
Stalled in broad daylight at a busy intersection, the gunman aborted the robbery and fled with only the $10,000 the guard had been carrying. Within minutes, local authorities and the FBI Violent Crimes Unit responded to the scene of the crime. Just a few blocks away from the two previous robberies.
This pattern was starting to develop that all these crimes were happening in the same general area along U.S. Highway number 1.
FBI interviews with the bank employees confirmed that the robbers were the same pair who'd hit the armored cars. Maybe they figured a drive-through bank would be less heavily fortified than armored cars, easier sources of cash.
There was no higher priority in this case. We had to find these guys, and we had to get them off the street before they killed more innocent people.
But just an hour and a half later, they hit the Professional Savings Bank only 18 blocks away.
Get your hands up! Get your hands up! Get on over there! Get out of the ground! On the ground now! Get out now! Get out! Get out! You, come here! Come on over here! Come on! You, come over here!
The robbers quickly took control of the lobby. At gunpoint, both customers and employees quickly followed their orders. With their masks and high-powered weapons, no one doubted they meant business.
Face down! Face down!
This time, they scored big. They raced off with over $41,000, delivered earlier that day by Wells Fargo. They escaped in yet another getaway car, a Chevy Monte Carlo. Witnesses had little to tell agents. The robbers had entered quickly and forced everyone down on the floor where they couldn't see what was going on.
Say to you exactly.
Get your hands up.
But since the men had actually been inside the bank this time, perhaps the security cameras had captured them on tape. Agents were soon disappointed to learn that the cameras had somehow malfunctioned and nothing had been recorded. It was the fourth robbery in 6 weeks. The heavily armed robbers were looting banks and armored cars in broad daylight.
The witnesses in these cases indicated that they felt that these people looked like true professionals. The way they walked, the way they talked, the way they carried the weapons. And I truly believed up until when we finally found out who they were, that we could very easily have been dealing with police officers here or very recent ex-military.
With such violent criminals on the loose, agents honed their own skills on the firing range. They worked the case relentlessly, exchanging whatever slim leads they had. But nothing panned out. 2 months went by without another robbery, and still there were no leads. On Friday, January 10th, 1986, William Roberts prepared to make a transaction at the Barnett Bank, just as an armored truck was unloading outside. He looked up from his checkbook and watched as 2 masked robbers shot the guard in the back. As the guard lay on the ground, one of the gunmen shot him twice more. This was the robbers' 5th heist in just 3 months, and another big hit. They fled with $54,000. William Roberts trailed the men for blocks. Though he maintained a safe distance, Roberts worried the thieves knew he was following them. Still, he stayed on their tail and noted their license tag and car model. He tracked them to a parking lot where they pulled in next to a white pickup truck. Roberts parked across the street and continued to watch them. He noted the make and model of the pickup truck, but could not see the tag number. After driving off, Roberts would flag down an officer and tell him the story. The FBI responded to the scene and interviewed bank employees. They found several .223 rounds, later determined to be fired from the same weapon used in the first 2 robberies. Nearby FBI agents examined the getaway car the robbers had left behind. But William Roberts was the star witness. Thanks to Roberts, the FBI had the first big break in a 3-month string of violent robberies. A check on the license tag of the getaway car revealed the car was registered to a man named Aureliano Brielle. Agents prepared to pay him a visit. Since the car had never been reported stolen, they suspected Brielle was involved in the crimes. They dressed for safety. In Miami, the FBI had been tracking 2 masked gunmen who had been robbing armored cars and banks, already killing 1 guard. Now agents had located the registered owner of one of the getaway cars. On January 14th, Special Agent Morales and a partner arrived at the home of Aureliano Brielle, the registered owner of the car. A woman opened the door. Special Agent Morales now works undercover and wears a hood to protect his identity.
She asked me if I was there about her son, and I said yes, I was, as a matter of fact. She said, well, my son Emilio has been missing.
Mrs. Brielle's husband came to the door and they invited the agents to come into the house. Mr. Brielle explained that his son Emilio had disappeared 3 months ago with the family car, which he borrowed to go target shooting in the Everglades. The Brielles had filed a missing persons report, but heard nothing. They had hoped the agents brought news of their son. But both the Brielles and the agents would be disappointed. The FBI knew nothing of the young man's whereabouts. And as the interview progressed, Agent Morales grew certain the Brielles knew nothing of the robberies.
The conclusion at the end of the day was that the Brielle family was not involved. They were victims. Their car had been stolen and their son was missing.
The Metro-Dade Police Department processed the Brielle's car with FBI agents observing. But evidence technicians found no fingerprints or anything else to advance the case. The next 2 months were quiet again, though the robbers remained on the loose. Agents worked other cases as they continued to mine every possible resource for clues. Then on March 14th, Special Agent Ben Grogan told a skeptical Agent Morales about a newspaper article he believed was related to the case.
I guarantee it, that car right
The article reported the attempted murder of a man named Jose Collazo 2 days earlier. 2 men had shot Collazo multiple times. Then they had stolen his gun and his car, a black 1982 Chevy Monte Carlo.
Guarantee you I'm right.
Grogan swore that the vehicle would be the bank robber's next getaway car. While it seemed to some agents nothing more than a hunch, they respected Grogan.
Car and disappeared. Shot him 4 times with the arm, through the face.
At 53, he was a career agent with 25 years on the job, including time as a SWAT team leader.
Is he still alive? Yeah, he got up, walked 1.5 miles to a convenience store, made a phone
His colleagues
call.
called him the doctor because he could do jobs no one else could do.
What do you think? Check on these plates.
So they took a chance on his hunch.
Get on it. Good job.
Mr. Collazo, tell me what happened. These 2 guys.
Grogan and another agent visited Collazo in the hospital.
They were 2 white males. 2 white males.
Collazo was in rough shape, with wounds to the side of his head, his arm, and his back. But he managed to tell the story of his nightmarish afternoon in the Everglades. Collazo had gone to a recreational trail near a lake, where gun owners often practice target shooting. He was firing his .22 when 2 men drove up beside him.
How you doing?
The driver pulled a gun on Collazo,
Hold up, shut up.
who somehow had the presence of mind to identify it as a steel blue Magnum revolver.
Shut up.
He pegged the other man's rifle as a Ruger Mini 14.
Shut up, shut up. Give him the gun. Give him the gun.
When the assailants demanded Collazo's guns, car, and wallet, he complied.
Now back on up. Back up. Give you everything. Back up. Shut up.
But they shot him several times anyway,
Back up.
at close range. Then they left, taking Collazo's Monte Carlo and their own F-150 pickup truck. As they drove off, they believed Collazo was dead. He was just waiting until the shooters were gone. Then he would rally what little strength he had to survive.
Collazo had to make a decision as to whether he would try to live or just lay down and die. And Collazo said he chose to try to live. So he picked himself up out of that lake and walked almost a mile after being shot 3 times to seek help.
Finding Collazo was the best break in the case so far. He provided the single clue no witness until now could offer: a description of the suspects' faces. They had not worn masks when they assaulted him. Using Collazo's description, a Dade County police artist drew composite sketches of his assailants. The drawings would be made into posters with information about the suspects and their crimes, plus the warning that both men were heavily armed and extremely dangerous. Retired Special Agent John Hanlon, a 22-year FBI veteran then assigned to the Violent Crimes Unit, remembers what Collazo said.
Collazo was able to give a description of the guys. He told us about the white pickup truck. He was shot in the same general area as we thought Emilio Brielle had disappeared.
In the coming days, agents stepped up their efforts. They conducted a grid search of the streets crossing South Dixie Highway in the vicinity of the bank robberies.
I got the agents together. After I told them what I had on my mind, they looked at me like I was crazy. But I said, I want you to go down between 88th Street on South Dixie Highway and 185th Street and come up with any license numbers on white Ford F-150 pickup trucks. Something just told me in my gut that perhaps, who knows, we're trying to make our own luck. What is it, 1,000,000 to 1, 10,000,000 to 1? I don't know. But they came back with the license numbers of 10 white Ford F-150 pickup trucks.
Computerized checks of the license numbers would reveal the owners' names. Agents would then request driver's license photos from the Department of Motor Vehicles. Perhaps if Collazo saw the photos, he could identify the truck's owner. But in 1986, technology was slow, and before the photos came back from the DMV, the robbers struck again. On Wednesday, March 19th, just 1 week after Collazo's assault.
Get your hands up! Get your hands up! Turn around! Get out! Get out! Get down! On the floor! Both of them! Come on out! Get out!
The thieves hit another bank on South Dixie Highway.
Back up! Get out! Come on! Get out! Give me the bag!
It was their 6th hit in 5 months.
Give me the money! Get it! Put your face down! Be quiet!
One kept the terrified customers at bay. The other looted money from a teller.
Stand, everybody! Go, move! Don't look out!
The men escaped with over $8,000 in cash. As customers and employees recovered from the assault, an off-duty customs official who had seen the robbers flee called police. He'd noted the make of the getaway car, a black Chevy Monte Carlo, and the tag number, NTJ-891. Just as Agent Grogan had predicted, it was Jose Collazo's car.
They didn't even change the tag. And we're not really sure whether they were, well, we're pretty sure they weren't that stupid, but we speculate that in their minds, you know, they were these hard men. And we think that they were probably just saying, hey, in your face, police, you know, come and get us if you can.
Investigators learned little of value from witnesses. At this bank, the security cameras had filmed the entire robbery. But the videotape was of little use. The camera's lenses had captured little more than unidentifiable masked bandits. There was little doubt these robbers planned each hit carefully.
It appeared to me that they were doing surveillance of the banks prior to some of the robberies, because on most occasions they robbed the bank within 10 minutes of delivery of a cash shipment by an armored car company. So they were waiting until the cash was inside from the armored car company and then hit the bank.
On April 10th, Gordon McNeil and Ben Grogan discussed the case at firearms practice, sifting for any clues they may have overlooked. It had been about 3 weeks since the last robbery. There were no clues to the thieves' identities, but McNeil detected a pattern.
You're always looking in law enforcement for patterns of crime, things that seem to happen on a consistent basis. And the only thing that we had gone in these cases was this significant pattern that developed, always on Friday between 9 and 12, hitting the same banks multiple times, always in the same 40 square block area, always along South Dixie Highway.
Agents planned a surveillance for the next day. They would fan out to patrol the area where the robbers had struck so often.
Hey guys, you got a minute?
Yeah.
Unit Supervisor Gordon McNeil personally led the operation.
Everybody will leave from that location.
So we just couldn't wait for them to rob another bank. We had to get out there and we had to make our own luck, and maybe we could find them.
Start watching for the vehicle. You come across
Agent Hanlon remembers what happened next.
put it into play. Hopefully it'll work out.
Eddie Morales walked over and said, "Hey, let's go down there." And I thought, well, what the heck, So as a whim, there was no pressure to go or anything of that kind. I certainly had enough to do, and I liked Eddie, and I figured, well, we'll go on down there, we'll ride down, and rather cavalierly, and spend some good times with Ed, and we'll take it from there.
Many believed it was a long shot, but 14 Miami FBI agents met in a parking lot at 8:45 a.m. on Friday, April 11th, 1986. They would surveil a 53-block grid along South Dixie Highway, where 2 commando-style gunmen had pulled off 3 bank robberies and 3 armored car heists in 6 months. The suspects were described as white men, of medium build, one with a handlebar mustache, both about 30 years old. They were heavily armed and extremely dangerous. They might be driving a black Monte Carlo, license number NTJ 891. After a robbery spree that had lasted 6 months, Miami FBI agents went on the offensive in search of 2 killers, possibly driving a black Monte Carlo. They met to patrol an area where the 2 armed robbers had used military tactics to hit armored cars and banks. All would be stationed along the major thoroughfare of South Dixie Highway. Agents Ben Grogan and Jerry Dove were on their way to stake out the Barnett Bank when the impossible happened. A car that fit the description of the suspect's vehicle pulled directly in front of them. In disbelief, Agent Grogan advised all units of what he saw.
Attention all units, we're behind.
Gordon McNeil remembers the call.
Grogan was not an emotional person. Nothing could get Grogan excited. And I still remember his voice. He said, "We are behind a black Chevrolet Monte Carlo, Dade, Florida tag, NTJ 891. He said, "That's the tag, isn't it, Gordo?" He was just incredulous.
Agents Morales and Hanlon were stationed at the Professional Savings Bank when they heard Grogan's call. They began to search for their colleagues. Hanlon was driving, with Morellis working the radio. Hanlon tried to get a gauge on Grogan and Dove's location.
And I remember saying to Eddie, call Ben, tell him to start calling the cross streets so we'll know how close we're getting. Before Eddie had a chance to go on the air, Ben starts calling off the cross streets, and we're hitting those cross streets, one after another, so we were real close to them.
After proceeding south for several blocks, Hanlon and Morellis closed in behind them. The robbers soon suspected they were being followed. Whether they knew their pursuers were FBI or not, the suspects wanted to lose them. They took a right turn on 117th Street into a residential neighborhood, quiet at this time of day.
Still following?
Still behind us. They're coming.
They turned right again, trying to lose the tail. But the agents hung on, playing for time, as Agent Morellis recalls.
We were just trying to wait for as many FBI units to get to the location as possible. And we were also basically responding to what the subjects did. They weren't in any hurry. When they turned onto 120th Street, they actually slowed down.
The caravan continued on, with the agents always concerned about endangering innocent bystanders. Then the suspects made a left onto 82nd. It appeared they were heading back to the busy highway, where civilians would be at risk should a confrontation turn violent. When Grogan saw the silhouette of a long-barreled rifle through the rear window of the subject's vehicle, he knew it was time to act.
Shut any car stop, let's do it.
It was clear the suspects were preparing to do battle. Grogan put the light on his car and ordered a felony stop. Grogan pulled alongside the suspect's car and ordered them to stop. The suspects ignored the order, and Grogan pulled ahead of them, blocking their escape. Hanlon and Morellis moved up, boxing them in. The sight made an indelible impression on veteran agent John Hanlon.
And I'll never forget the man's face. I mean, I could pick him out today. I mean, he looked like your basic Western bad man. He looked very, very determined.
It seemed the suspects were as desperate to prevail as the agents who pursued them. Two heavily armed fugitives had ignored FBI orders to stop their vehicle. Special agents now tried to force them to comply. The last to catch up to the group was Agent Richard Manauzi. As he pulled behind the suspect's car, he saw one of the gunmen take aim at Morellis and Hanlon. Manauzi rammed the fugitive's car from behind.
They swung into a U-turn, and then Manauzi was able to hit him again and knocked him over into this parking area up against some cars over there.
passenger opened fire with a Mini-14 assault rifle. Outgunned, Agent Manauzi crawled to cover. Agent McNeil arrived seconds later, firing at point-blank range. They were surrounded by FBI. Their vehicle could not move, but they had superior firepower. And they refused to surrender. The driver fired a shotgun blast at Grogan. McNeil hit the driver in the neck. But the semi-automatic kept pumping out the rounds until one finally caught McNeil in the hand. Morellis and Hanlon advanced to cover him. Hanlon's .38 held 5 rounds. The Mini-14 had 30 rounds in each clip. And one of them shot down Agent Morellis.
It was all one continuous recollection. It was like 1 second I'm looking at Gordon McNeil's back, trying to maneuver to his left, and the next second is blue sky. And I looked at my left arm, and my left arm was completely shattered. It was like roadkill.
His partner was down, but the shooter kept on firing. But when he tried to escape out the window, Jerry Dove hit him in the chest with his 9mm. But to Dove's horror, the man shot McNeil in the neck.
I couldn't move my upper body, I couldn't move my arm, and I couldn't move my legs, so I assumed that I was totally paralyzed at that particular point. I couldn't move.
2 more FBI agents arrived and joined the gunfight. By now, the shooter had been hit 4 times, but he continued to advance and fire.
He just made up his mind that he was gone down, he was gone out, and he was going to take as many of us with him as he possibly could.
The agents knew they were outgunned, firing 6 shooters against the suspect's 30-round semi-automatic assault weapons. Dove and Grogan were forced to retreat behind their car to reload. Hanlon, too, reloaded. But the shooter kept on coming.
And one went right through my knuckles on my right hand and through the knuckle in my thumb. A bunch of lead and whatever went into the back of my arm, and I remember my gun flying. I said, "Ben, I've been hit."
As Hanlon tried to retreat under the bumper, the gunman shot him in the groin.
The blood geysered from my groin to my knee. I mean, the blood just came out like a balloon breaking.
Grogan was hit. And then Dove. Before they could reload their weapons.
I remember Ben saying, "Oh my God," and he fell at my feet. And at some point along in here, I heard the breath go out of him. He went, "Ah."
The subject made his way to Agent Dove's car. With his left arm nearly blown off, Agent Morellis managed to pull himself out. The shooter was trying to flee, and Morales had to stop him. Mortally wounded, the second suspect somehow dragged himself out of his car and joined his partner. If the car started, Morales knew they could only go in reverse and back over the fallen agents.
Eventually, I just got angry because I knew internally that I was dying, and my one last thought was, hey, if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna take these guys with me. I'm gonna make sure that they're dead.
With his shotgun empty, Morales changed to his revolver and staggered forward, firing at the subjects. Morales' shots lodged in the men's spines, killing them both. It was a violent end to the lives of two violent men. Just a few minutes after it began, the bloodiest firefight in FBI history ended in tragedy. 2 agents were dead and 5 wounded. 2 suspects, still unidentified, had also been killed.
Over here! Hurry up! Hey, let's have a killing me, man!
3314. Agent Jerry Dove lay dead. At the age of 30, he'd earned a law degree and fulfilled his boyhood dream of joining the FBI. He wanted to make a difference and had given his life trying. His partner, Ben Grogan, had also perished in the firefight. He had been just 1 year away from retirement when his wife could finally have stopped worrying about her husband's dangerous career. Crime scene technicians arrived at the site. Metro-Dade County Homicide Bureau Sergeant David Rivers was also there. Rivers had the Herculean task of reconstructing 5 minutes of living terror. That would take weeks.
Well, we have to find out what happened. And you do that in various ways. You obviously speak to the agents that were involved, and they can tell you what each one of them did individually. And then part of that is to take those different statements as to what they did individually and match it up with the physical evidence. The wounds on the body, the bullet holes in the cars, where the guns are located, where the cars are located, and to reconstruct it to make sure everything's exactly interpreted properly.
Technicians recovered 143 bullets fired from the fugitives' weapons. Questions that had plagued agents for so long were finally being answered. The Ruger Mini 14 rifle used to kill agents Grogan and Dove would match the .223 bullets found at some of the armored car and bank robbery scenes. In fact, the FBI crime lab could now forensically link the killers with several of the earlier heists. And from fingerprints, the agents soon identified the subjects as 32-year-old Michael Lee Platt and 34-year-old William Russell Maddox. But one question remained. What kind of men had wreaked this destruction, and why? Agents could not have been more surprised by what they learned from the killer's friends and neighbors. Instead of outlaws living on the edge, prepared for the ultimate confrontation, Platt and Maddox were known as quiet family men. Photos showed their families relaxing together. Platt had a wife and 3 children. Maddox was a single dad. They were partners in a landscaping business. But further investigation gave up the lie of their double life. Inside a shed, agents found guns and ammunition, including the .22 Maddox and Platt had stolen from Jose Collazo when they tried to kill him in the Everglades. Agents would also uncover evidence of a bizarre murder pact in which the men may have killed each other's previous wives. No one had been charged in the two cases, but now they would be reopened. Within days, agents would confirm that Maddox and Platt had killed 25-year-old Emilio Brielle in the Everglades. A hiker found Brielle's skeletal remains in the Everglades, not far from where Collazo had been assaulted. Then another tragic footnote surfaced.
Thanks a lot. Hey, how did that interview go for you earlier today?
Special Agent Steve Warner received a package from the Florida Department of Motor Vehicles. In it was a copy of William Russell Maddox's driver's license. He was the owner of one of the white Ford F-150 pickup trucks agents had located a few weeks before. But there had been a delay in sending the licenses.
If they had arrived April 11th or prior to that, Collazo would have been able to positively identify Maddox, and we probably would have been able to arrest Maddox, and also Platt, and 2 FBI agents wouldn't have been killed. But that's not the way the luck worked out in this particular case.
The FBI investigation revealed that both of the killers had served in the military. Platt had been a ranger, a member of the Army's elite First Strike Force, which explained the pair's commando tactics, fundamentally different than training received by law enforcement.
We don't have an acceptable body count in civilian law enforcement. We're taught one way, and that's defensive type shooting. You take cover, you do not take casualties. And then you look at the way Platt reacted that day. He reacted in a military fashion. He had the heavier weapon. He had the Mini 14 with a 30-round capacity. His back was basically against the wall. He had no place to go, so he advanced forward on our position, laying down suppression fire, and ambushed Grogan and Dove, who were behind the car.
As agents finally put the pieces together, a frightening portrait emerged of 2 formidable adversaries.
At the end of the shooting, Platt had 11 hits, Maddox had 6 hits. Platt was literally shot to pieces, and he kept fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting until he ran out of breath. He fought to the last.
They were going to die, it's just they weren't dying fast enough. And they weren't prepared to lay down and die. You know? They weren't about to give up.
Out of this tragedy came some positive changes that have improved the safety of all in the law enforcement community. Agents and officers now carry more powerful weapons, and their training better prepares them for violent confrontations like the one on April 11th, 1986. As hundreds mourned the deaths of 2 dedicated and selfless FBI agents, those in law enforcement have looked for meaning in the tragic events of that April morning. Over the years, Gordon McNeil has found some resolution.
The story's not Platt and Maddox. It's not important who they were. It's important to recall the courage that was shown by the agents that day, and the FBI. They did their job.
When a young woman vanished, family and friends discovered her secret life. The political appointee carried on an illicit affair with a wealthy, married man. Investigators suspected that her ex-lover was responsible, but they had little physical evidence to support their theory. In order to bring him to justice, the FBI would have to go undercover and turn brother against brother.
Power is a responsibility, as well as a privilege. But in the wrong hands, power can corrupt. This is especially true in the legal community. For former Deputy Attorney General for the state of Delaware, losing sight of his sworn oath to uphold justice would prove lethal. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When a prominent attorney tried to put himself above the law, it was up to the FBI to prove that justice is blind.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Thursday, June 27, 1996. At the upscale Panorama restaurant, prominent Delaware attorney Thomas Capano, separated from his wife, dined with his mistress Anne Marie Fahey, the appointment secretary to the Delaware governor.
Back next week, we'll be able to look how good we work together.
Despite the candlelight and wine, her mood was grim. Anne Marie told Capano she wanted to end their relationship. Capano was furious with her decision. After dinner, Capano drove Anne Marie to the Wilmington, Delaware house he rented since leaving his wife. He insisted she come inside to continue the conversation. He didn't want their affair to end. Two nights later, Anne Marie failed to show up for a dinner party with her sister Kathleen. Concerned, Kathleen arranged to meet the Delaware State Police at Anne Marie's flat. She explained that no one had heard from the governor's secretary since Thursday. They found unpacked perishable groceries on the kitchen counter. Kathleen called Michael Scanlon, a successful banker and Anne Marie's close friend, to see if he had seen her. He was supposed to pick her up for the dinner party, but Anne Marie never returned his calls.
This is out of character for her?
He has everything always put in its place. I just don't understand.
Anne Marie's family knew her to be neat and orderly, yet her apartment was in disarray. Shoes littered the bedroom floor alongside her purse. An expensive pantsuit remained in its gift box.
This isn't normal.
No, not at all.
A detective searched the purse. He found her wallet and ID, though her keys were missing. Detective Robert Donovan of the Wilmington Police was called to the scene and believed that Anne Marie hadn't left the apartment on her own.
From the information that they're providing, they said she's not the type of person to leave, go walking around the neighborhood, or to go somewhere without letting somebody know where she's at. Number one, typical with a female, when she goes somewhere, she takes her pocketbook, wallet, identification, something.
This is Detective Donovan.
In the bedroom, Kathleen found a packet of letters from a man named Thomas Capano. They professed his love for her. Kathleen and Scanlon were perplexed. Anne Marie had never even mentioned Capano. Though Anne Marie's sister had never heard of the man, Detective Donovan certainly had. Thomas Capano was a powerful man in the state of Delaware.
Tom Capano was extremely connected. He was, at one point, he was number 2 man for the city of Wilmington. He was head legal counsel for the governor for the state. He was very close with a number of state representatives, state senators, extremely close with some retired police chiefs for the city of Wilmington. Very influential.
The detective found Anne Marie's journal in the bedroom and flipped to the last page. The diary entry evidenced her relief at ending her love affair with Capano. It read, "I have finally brought closure to Tom Capano. What a controlling, insecure maniac."
Doesn't look like a happy relationship, though.
Not at all.
The officers paid a visit to Thomas Capano at 3:39 a.m. Separated from his wife and the father of 4 daughters, 47-year-old Capano was living in a rented house located only minutes from Anne Marie's apartment. Capano confirmed that he had a relationship with Anne-Marie, but claimed that it was long over. According to him, the couple had parted as friends. He told the detectives that he had dinner with her on Thursday night in Philadelphia. Afterwards, he brought her back to his house briefly to give her a gift and some groceries she needed. Then he took her home. When asked, Capano claimed he had not seen Anne-Marie since, nor was he surprised that she was missing. Capano explained that Anne-Marie had Friday off. Perhaps she had decided to go away for the weekend. He described her as moody and at times suicidal. He suggested the police wait until Monday morning when she would probably show up at work.
We then asked him if she, in fact, was at his house, and if he would have a problem with us looking through his house. He stated that he would have a problem because his children were with him for the weekend and they were upstairs asleep.
On Monday, however, Anne-Marie failed to show up for work. Investigators returned to her apartment building and talked to her downstairs neighbor.
Can you tell me something about what happened last night?
The neighbor had been away over the weekend, but remembered hearing a single set of footsteps in Anne-Marie's apartment on Thursday evening at around 9:45.
Normally we hear high heels.
They seemed heavier than usual, possibly a man's. She heard nothing more after that night. State and local investigators checked Anne-Marie's bank and credit card accounts and found no activity after June 28th. Friends and relatives reported they had not seen or heard from her since that day.
All right, here.
Apparently, Thomas Capano was the last person to have seen Anne-Marie Fahey.
Take him up to the Panorama restaurant in Philadelphia and see if you can find
Investigators traveled across the Delaware border to Pennsylvania to corroborate Capano's story. They spoke to the waitress who served the couple on June 27th at about 7 p.m. She remembered the evening and recognized Thomas Capano and Anne-Marie Fahey from the photos.
Yeah, that's her. She wasn't really happy.
She wasn't.
The waitress recalled that the pair seemed tense. Anne-Marie said little and hardly touched her food. After she handed the bill to Capano, he passed it to Anne-Marie, who signed his name on the charge slip. The waitress never overheard any of their conversation since the couple stopped talking each time she approached the table. Investigators met with several of Anne-Marie's close friends, who described an illicit affair that had begun almost 3 years earlier. In 1993, 27-year-old Anne-Marie Fahey met Thomas Capano in the governor's office.
No, Tom Capano.
Despite her high-profile job, she was impressed by the powerful lawyer and flattered when she caught his eye. Investigators learned that while Capano showered Anne-Marie with expensive gifts, he only romanced her in out-of-the-way places to avoid being seen. She felt a strong attraction to the charismatic older man, but feared her family's disapproval and kept the affair secret.
I'll be waiting for you when you go back.
As months passed, Anne-Marie confided to her friends that Capano's charming exterior belied an angry and manipulative man. He understood love only in terms of control. She told her friends that she couldn't trust him. By the spring of 1996, his manipulation and anger had damaged their relationship beyond repair. Capano told Anne-Marie that he had separated from his wife so they could stop hiding.
I don't even want to talk to you about this. I don't even want to talk to you about this.
Give me more. You know how much I give.
Anne-Marie wanted out. Capano refused to let go. Detectives learned that shortly before Anne-Marie disappeared, she began seeing Michael Scanlon, who she found caring and stable. It was the relationship that she had always hoped for. The prospect of a marriage proposal seemed promising. Thomas Capano continued to pursue her. Anne-Marie told friends that Capano was stalking her. She was scared and wanted him out of her life. Capano refused to accept the rejection.
Well, Tom Capano had never been told no before. He thought that he could control everything in his life and everything in everybody else's life. Finally, somebody, Anne-Marie Fahey, stood up to him and told him, no, I've had enough, and Tom couldn't handle it.
The Fahey family posted a $10,000 reward for information relating to Anne-Marie's disappearance. Over the 4th of July weekend, hundreds of concerned citizens helped police conduct a massive search of the local park where Anne-Marie often jogged. The governor himself joined in the hunt.
Thank you for everybody who knows and loves Anne-Marie.
They found no trace of the missing secretary. The case became a federal investigation since Anne-Marie, a resident of Delaware, was last seen in Pennsylvania. Special Agent Eric Alpert of the FBI's Wilmington field office offered his help.
I contacted Robert Donovan, asked him if we could be of any assistance. He said we could. At that point, we pulled telephone records and credit card records.
With the help of the U.S. Attorney, Alpert secured credit card statements and phone records belonging to Thomas Capano and Anne-Marie Fahey. Assistant U.S. Attorney Colm Connolly noticed that Capano made a $308 purchase at Wallpaper Warehouse just 2 days after Fahey disappeared.
Thought that was odd because Tom Capano was living in a rental house, so I called the number for Wallpaper Warehouse. The person answered the phone and said air-based carpets. I turned to Bob Donovan right away, and we both had the same reaction, which was, my God, he must have rolled her up in a carpet.
Investigators now believe that Thomas Capano killed Anne-Marie Fahey, but they needed more than a hunch to convince a judge there was probable cause for a warrant to search Capano's house. In July of 1996, agents and local detectives focused on attorney Thomas Capano, who they suspected was responsible for the murder of his former mistress, Anne-Marie Fahey. 2 days after she vanished, Capano had purchased a new carpet. For Assistant U.S. Attorney Colm Connolly, it raised suspicions that Capano had concealed Anne-Marie's body in a rug and removed it from his house.
Up until that point, we had probable cause to believe that Tom Capano had played a role in the disappearance of Anne-Marie Fahey. But what we didn't have was probable cause that we'd find evidence in his house.
I really wanted to call you in to ask.
Hoping to establish probable cause in order to obtain a search warrant, investigators learned that Capano's housekeeper had cleaned his home 4 days before Anne-Marie's disappearance. She added that Capano canceled her service the following week, claiming that the house didn't need cleaning since his children hadn't stayed over. The detective quickly noted the inconsistency in Capano's story. On the night he was questioned in his home, the attorney claimed his children were upstairs asleep. 3 weeks later, the housekeeper returned to the residence and noticed something that struck her as odd. The love seat and carpet from the living room were gone. In their place sat 2 chairs and a brand new carpet. This simple observation gave Assistant U.S. Attorney Colm Connolly all he needed to move forward.
So when you combined the rug and the couch with Tom Capano's statement that he had brought Anne-Marie to his home on the evening of June 27th, and you combine that with all the other evidence we knew about their tumultuous relationship, we now were armed with probable cause to get a search warrant for his house.
Connolly and FBI agent Eric Alpert prepared an airtight 37-page search warrant for Thomas Capano's Wilmington home, serving it on July 31st, 1996. Detective Robert Donovan didn't know what they'd find, but they knew where to look.
We searched the entire residence, but we took special attention to this room, the great room area, because we believed that Anne-Marie Fahey was murdered in that room.
The team found the 2 chairs and new carpet described by the housekeeper. They moved them to see what might be hidden underneath.
Hey, careful with the furniture. Now you don't have to destroy the place.
The floor was clean. On the baseboard nearby, agents found something promising. Barely visible to the untrained eye, they saw 2 brown spots that appeared to be dried blood. Agents retrieved samples by swabbing the area with a mild saline solution. Investigators hoped the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. could provide stronger forensic evidence from the samples. For DNA lab examiner Alan Giusti, testing the recovered material presented a challenge.
The items themselves are not very large. The stains were actually fairly small, and because of that, we have to be careful because our test will consume part of a stain to test to determine if it's blood.
Giusti performed a Kastle-Meyer test. This test requires only a pinhead-sized specimen. He applied the chemical phenolphthalein, which turns pink when mixed with blood. The test worked. For Agent Eric Alpert and the team, the discovery was important.
This is very significant because at this point we had no murder weapon and had no other physical evidence in the case, so finding blood was very important to us. We needed to find whose blood that was and whether it matched Anne-Marie Fahey's blood.
It was impossible to determine whether the blood belonged to Anne-Marie without DNA samples from her or her parents. Samples from her siblings would be too disparate to provide solid results. Unfortunately, Anne-Marie's parents were deceased. Anne-Marie's brothers and sisters provided investigators with a possible lead. A check of the missing woman's calendar book revealed that she had given blood a month before she disappeared. Agents went to the blood bank to subpoena the sample. It was too late. Her blood had been reduced to plasma and shipped overseas. There was only a slim chance it could be retrieved. Worse yet, DNA-rich red and white blood cells had been removed, and extracting DNA from plasma alone is next to impossible. As the investigation slowly moved forward, Thomas Capano continued to live a life of ease. As the eldest of 4 brothers, he had always been his parents' favorite, and the son who had achieved success in all he sought. Thomas's brothers had always looked up to him. Jerry, the youngest, had been rescued many times by his older brother's legal expertise. Joseph ran the family construction company, while Louis managed the family's considerable real estate holdings. The Capanos were multi-millionaires and seemed impenetrable. Investigators learned early on that Thomas Capano's family and friends were unlikely to cooperate.
We spoke with an awful lot of people that are very influential that just would not believe that Tom Capano was capable of murder. And were mad at us for investigating him. We're mad that we believed he was, in fact, a murderer. That was frustrating because it was tough to get anybody that was cooperative.
The team believed that if Capano killed Anne-Marie, someone close to him probably helped dispose of the body. But no one was talking. With no body, no DNA sample, no murder weapon, and no cooperation from his cohorts, the federal case against Thomas Capano was weak. On August 6th, Agent Alpert received a call from Sean Taylor, a project manager in Louis Capano's development company. Taylor knew something he believed might interest investigators. He agreed to meet agents and detectives in a secure location, fearing what would happen to him if the Capano brothers found out he was talking to authorities. He described an unusual event that occurred the day after Anne-Marie was reported missing.
He advised us he was a project manager at one of the Louis Capano and Associates construction sites. He stated that he was ordered on July 1st, the Monday after Anne-Marie Fahey's disappearance, to have 4 dumpsters on the property pulled and dumped. And he felt that was strange because none of them were full, and it would be very out of character to do that because of the cost of dumping something like that.
This reinforced the investigators' suspicion that Thomas Capano had help disposing of Anne-Marie's body.
2 weeks earlier.
Louis Capano's development company was served with a subpoena for the dumpster records, as investigators began to turn up the heat on the powerful Capano family.
Louis, I need to talk to you.
Here, go ahead and take these, get with Bob.
They hoped one of the brothers would turn against Thomas and tell authorities about Anne-Marie's disappearance.
Your screw-ups are driving me crazy.
The solid bonds between brothers began to strain, but Thomas managed to keep everyone in line.
See you later. Bye.
Under oath, Louis denied that he had ordered the dumpsters emptied. Undaunted, investigators continued to pursue their best lead.
So we traced that dumpster. We went to the hauling company, and we found out exactly when the dumpster had been removed. We found out the dump that it had been brought to, and we went to that dump site.
In the middle of August, an evidence recovery team arrived at the Delaware landfill. Workers pointed out the area where the dumpsters had been emptied. The recovery team searched for anything that could be traced back to Thomas Capano's home.
We were looking for the carpeting, the love seat, possibly a murder weapon, and also possibly Anne-Marie Fahey's body.
For 4 hot, grueling days, FBI agents scoured the landfills. They found nothing. The investigators finally walked away, tired and frustrated. Despite their strong suspicions, they didn't have enough evidence to bring charges. To agents, detectives, and prosecutors, it looked as if Thomas Capano had gotten away with the perfect murder. In August 1996, FBI agents and Delaware authorities continued to pursue evidence against Thomas Capano for the murder of his former mistress, Anne-Marie Fahey. She had been missing for 8 weeks and was presumed murdered by her wealthy ex-lover. As FBI agent Eric Alpert explains, investigators had no physical evidence to support their theory.
There were several challenges in this investigation. We had no murder weapon, no true crime scene, no body, and no witnesses who would come forward and give us information as to what had happened.
On September 6th, investigators received the call they were hoping for. The blood plasma Anne-Marie had donated a month before her disappearance had been recovered just before it reached its European destination.
Sure.
Agents needed a known sample of Anne-Marie's DNA to compare to the unknown sample from the blood spots found in Capano's house. But DNA lab examiner Alan Giusti didn't know if the plasma would be sufficient.
The problem with extracting DNA from plasma is that plasma is the portion of blood that is separated from the blood cells, and the blood cells are what contain the DNA. So when you're working with plasma, you're actually working with a very poor source of DNA.
To his surprise, he found residual red blood cells in the plasma. This enabled Giusti to retrieve a small amount of Anne-Marie's DNA. He compared her DNA sequence to the sequence from the unknown source. They matched. There was only a minute chance that the blood spots from Capano's house did not belong to Anne Marie Fahey. Investigators now had the first piece of physical evidence they needed to support their suspicion that Thomas Capano had committed murder. They knew they needed more. Capano's cell phone records revealed that he had called a woman named Debbie McIntyre from Stone Harbor, New Jersey on June 28th, the morning after Anne Marie disappeared. Investigators learned that Debbie McIntyre was yet another one of Capano's mistresses.
We saw that they called each other frequently, but we weren't sure about their relationship. From doing further interviews, we found that Thomas Capano and Debbie McIntyre had been having an affair for approximately 12 years. So at the same time when he was having an affair with Anne Marie Fahey, he was also having an affair with Debbie McIntyre.
Agents also learned that Jerry Capano, the youngest brother, had owned a boat anchored in Stone Harbor. Detective Robert Donovan investigated.
We found out that Jerry Capano had sold this boat locally. Somebody local had purchased it. We were able to track that down and spoke with a gentleman and looked at his boat.
They scoured the boat for traces of Anne Marie, but found nothing. The new boat owner told investigators that Jerry Capano had sold the boat without anchors. They suspected that the anchors were now at the bottom of the ocean, wrapped around Anne Marie's body. Assistant U.S. Attorney Colm Connolly and his team turned their attention to Jerry Capano.
And so beginning back in November of '96, we put in place this undercover operation with the idea that we would gather incriminating evidence of Jerry's activities and any other information we could gain about his role on June 28th in disposing of the body.
If agents gathered enough evidence to bring federal charges against Jerry, they could pressure him to talk about his brother's role in the murder. For 11 months, undercover agents tracked Jerry's every move. They learned that he frequented bars and nightclubs and used illegal drugs. They also learned that he collected firearms, a federal crime for a known drug user. On the evening of October 9th, 1997, 15 months after the disappearance of Anne Marie Fahey, the FBI, assisted by the ATF, raided Jerry Capano's house. He was caught completely by surprise. A friend with a criminal record stood with him in the garage. If agents found illegal narcotics stored in the same house as Jerry's weapons, they'd have the physical evidence needed to leverage his cooperation. They found a small arsenal of guns stored in the bedroom closet of Jerry's 3-year-old son. Agent Alpert searched the laundry room near the kitchen. He dug through the pockets of Jerry's clothes. Jerry's collection of rifles and handguns wasn't illegal per se, unless they found illicit drugs on the premises. Agent Alpert found them. He recovered cocaine and marijuana. Now investigators had what they needed to charge Jerry Capano with felony firearms violations. They could also levy child endangerment charges. They did neither. Prosecutors would offer immunity if Jerry would testify against his brother Thomas.
We did not believe Jerry had any role in the murder of Anne Marie Fahey. We only believed he had a role in the cover-up, the disposal of evidence. And we also knew he was very loyal to his brother. He almost viewed his brother as a father figure. But at the same time, he had a wife, he had children, he had a pretty good life, a life that he probably wouldn't want to give up to go to jail. And that was the card that we had to play.
I mean, they've come through the entire house.
After the raid, the FBI allowed Jerry Capano to consider all that was at stake.
We need to talk now.
He was forced to choose between his brother and his wife and children. The pressure upon Jerry Capano was enormous. Not only was he one of Thomas Capano's closest allies, he was his brother. Investigators weren't certain if Jerry would crack. Even if he did, they had no way of knowing if he could help them bring the powerful Thomas Capano to justice. A year and a half after the disappearance of Anne Marie Fahey, Jerry Capano asked to see the FBI and U.S. Attorney Colm Conley on November 8, 1997. Federal authorities had threatened Jerry Capano with federal firearm charges if he did not cooperate with their investigation. They suspected Jerry had helped his brother Thomas Capano dispose of Anne Marie's body in the Atlantic Ocean. With legal counsel by his side, Jerry related his involvement in the incident. It began months before Anne Marie's June 28th disappearance.
With you personally.
Early in 1996, his brother Thomas came to him with a problem. Jerry told Agent Eric Alpert that he didn't realize Thomas had lied to him.
Well, in February 1996, Thomas Capano went to his brother Jerry and told him that he was being extorted, that somebody was threatening his children. He asked Jerry to get him some cash to help pay the extortionists. He also asked Jerry for a gun and said that he might need Jerry's help someday with the boat to dispose of the extortionist's body.
Jerry provided Thomas with $8,000 and the gun he asked for. Thomas returned the weapon a month later, telling Jerry the money was enough. He didn't need the gun after all. He heard little else about Thomas's problem until Friday, June 29th, 1996.
I got a call from Tom.
Early in the morning, Jerry stepped out of his house to find his older brother parked at the end of the driveway. Thomas looked upset.
6 o'clock in the morning, Tom. What are you doing here?
Jerry, I need your help. Jerry, I need you to get the boat.
I don't want any part of it.
Jerry knew, as soon as Tom asked to use the boat, that Tom had been involved in the killing of somebody. And Jerry said to Tom, "Did you do it?" And his brother said yes. And Jerry said he didn't want to have any part in getting rid of a body, and he refused to give up the boat. He said he had a wife, he had kids, he had a beautiful home. And Tom played the brother card. Tom said, "I have nobody else to turn to. You're my kid brother. Please help me."
I'll meet you at your house.
About an hour?
And finally, Jerry relented. And Jerry agreed to meet Tom and to go to Stone Harbor and to take the boat out and dispose of the body.
Behind closed doors, they met inside Thomas's garage, where he asked Jerry to help him load a heavy cooler into his truck. He never opened the cooler, but Jerry believed the body of Thomas's extortionist was stuffed inside. Only the carpet remained. Jerry told his brother not to take it on the boat because it probably wouldn't sink. When they arrived at Stone Harbor, New Jersey, they carried the cooler down the dock in plain sight. It was a common cooler used by fishermen at the marina, large enough to carry an ample supply of bait. No one would think twice about two men loading the heavy container onto a boat. The brothers fueled up and headed for the open waters of the Atlantic. Thomas Capano ordered his brother to motor 60 miles offshore, where the water was deep enough to hide the body permanently. no one else would be close enough to see what the brothers were about to do. They heaved the cooler into the sea, but Thomas Capano miscalculated. The makeshift coffin floated. Thomas then ordered Jerry to sink the cooler by firing slugs into it. The cooler still floated. The millionaire lawyer retrieved it and decided to sink the corpse without the cooler. His younger brother wanted no part of it. He moved to the front of the boat while Thomas wrapped the boat's anchors around the body. What Jerry Capano saw next was critical for Detective Robert Donovan.
Jerry turns around when he asks Tom, "Are you done? Are you done?" Tom tells him, "Yeah, I'm done." As Jerry turns around to look at Tom, he sees a calf and a foot sinking down. On their way back to Stone Harbor, Thomas Capano disassembled the cooler and scattered its parts into the ocean.
And Tom said he needed me to come back to the house, that he had something else that I needed to do with him.
The work wasn't finished.
Wrapped it in anchor chains and threw it over.
His brother needed to dispose of more evidence.
Tom says, "I need your help getting rid of this couch." And Jerry sees a stain on the couch, which would be right about shoulder height, which is a large, he described as a basketball-size blood stain.
Well, then do something. Then do something about it if it bothers you.
Investigators believe the stain was caused by a fatal gunshot to Anne Marie's head. They dumped the couch and the carpet into a trash bin at a construction site managed by their brother Louis. Jerry had nothing more to add. When word got out that Jerry had cooperated with investigators, his brother Louis appeared with his lawyer 2 days later.
Conversations for an official record.
Louis Capano recanted his earlier statement and admitted that he had obeyed Thomas's orders to empty the dumpsters earlier than scheduled. The FBI began 24-hour surveillance on Thomas Capano. They believed the suspected murderer might try to kill his brothers to keep them from testifying. Less than a week later, on November 12, 1997, the surveillance team watched Capano and his brother Joseph loading suitcases into their truck. They were heading towards the airport. Agent Alpert feared Thomas was fleeing jurisdiction.
At that point, I paged Colin Conley, the Assistant United States Attorney who was inside the grand jury room, with a 911 page to come out. I told him of the details and said we need to make a decision on what we're going to do.
Investigators felt they still didn't have enough to charge Thomas Capano with kidnapping and murder, but agreed they had to stop him from fleeing. Alpert ordered his arrest on grounds that Capano had obstructed justice by coercing his brothers to give false testimony. 17 months after her disappearance, the suspected killer of Anne Marie Fahey was finally in custody. Two brothers now stood against one. But investigators still had no body and no murder weapon. On November 12, 1997, the FBI arrested prominent Delaware lawyer Thomas Capano. He was the prime suspect for the murder of Anne Marie Fahey. His younger brother Jerry claimed Thomas had dumped a corpse into the Atlantic Ocean. Jerry pointed investigators to the area off the New Jersey shore. but they never found Anne Marie's body. Assistant U.S. Attorney Colm Connolly had a daunting task ahead of him.
We didn't have a body, and that's always a problem. There have only been a handful of prosecutions in the country that have been successfully done without a body. And in Delaware, prior to this case, there had only been one case prosecuted without a body, and it had resulted in an acquittal.
The only physical evidence they had against Thomas Capano were 2 specks of Fahey's blood found in his living room. While investigators prepared the difficult prosecution, Special Agent Eric Alpert learned something that could strengthen their case.
We received a phone call from an individual who said that he had found the cooler floating in the ocean around the weekend of July 4th, 1996. And I asked him to further describe the cooler, and he said that the cooler was missing a lid and had a bullet hole in it.
The lead sounded promising.
I'll have somebody there.
The caller read an article about Capano's arrest that reported a cooler was used in the crime. But the story never mentioned that the lid was missing or that a slug had pierced it. Alpert immediately drove the 2 hours to Bay City, New Jersey to check the lead. On the weekend of July 4th, 1996, Ken Chubb was fishing 6 miles off Indian River when he came across a cooler bobbing in the ocean.
It had 2 bullet holes and blood stain, but you know, we were amazed that this was a brand new cooler, but we weren't amazed at the bullet holes or the blood because they shoot shark a lot, and there might have been a shark flopping around in there and they shot it, and that's where the blood came from.
Yes, sir. There certainly is. In fact, there's 2 of them.
Chubb patched the holes, replaced the lid, and used it as his own until the Capano arrest story broke. Agents discovered the barcode on the cooler matched the one Capano purchased with his credit card on April 22nd, 2 months before Anne Marie disappeared.
The cooler was important in this case because it prevented Tom Capano's defense team pretty much from saying that Jerry Capano was lying. It corroborated exactly what Jerry Capano had told us well before he knew we would ever find this cooler.
The cooler was their second piece of physical evidence, and its purchase demonstrated Capano's premeditation. Investigators still had no murder weapon. They searched records at local gun stores for purchases by Capano or by others close to him. They hit pay dirt. Investigators discovered that Capano's mistress, Debbie McIntyre, had purchased a .22 caliber Beretta on May 13th, 1996, 6 weeks before Fahey disappeared. They brought McIntyre in for questioning. She pretended that her relationship with Thomas Capano was more casual than it actually was.
She spent years in jail.
Connolly asked if Capano owned a gun. McIntyre denied it.
No.
I asked her, "Do you own a gun?" And immediately her demeanor changed. She started blushing. She got very nervous. It was clear that she was lying, and she told us this just fantastical story about buying a gun and then throwing it in the garbage can. And we asked her, did anybody know she had bought that gun? And she said, one person, and it was Tom Capano.
Connolly pointed out that if McIntyre supplied the gun to Capano, she had committed a felony. Under the advice of her attorney, McIntyre admitted that Capano had asked her to buy the gun in the first place. The trial began on October 26, 1998. Early on in the proceedings, Capano surprised the prosecution by admitting that he had disposed of Fahey's body as Jerry had testified. He also admitted to asking his brother Louis to empty the dumpsters early. On the witness stand, Capano painted his own version of events on the evening of June 27, 1996. After dinner, he and Anne Marie came back to his place. According to Capano, they had resolved their differences. They were enjoying each other's company when Debbie McIntyre burst into his house.
What are you doing? Who is this?
What are you doing in my house?
I am gonna...
Angry and despondent, McIntyre threatened suicide. Anne-Marie was killed instantly. Despite his legal training, Capano claimed he didn't call police because he was trying to protect McIntyre and himself. Instead, he retrieved the cooler that he said was to be a gift to his brother.
See if I can refresh your memory.
He decided to use it as a coffin.
This is the official document.
During cross-examination, Connolly pointed out that Capano had prosecuted a similar case in 1976 when he served as Assistant Attorney General for Delaware. In that case, the killer dumped his victim into a creek near Delaware City. At the time, Capano was quoted as saying the killer would have gotten away with his crime if he would have dumped the body into the Atlantic. Capano denied this.
Well, it's all here. Can I submit this, Your Honor?
In the state's version of events, Capano forced Anne-Marie Fahey to return to his house. She was determined to end their affair. Capano would not be jilted. He took out the Beretta that McIntyre bought for him and shot Fahey in cold blood. Then he stuffed her into the cooler. At about 9:45 that same evening, he entered Anne-Marie's apartment with fresh groceries and the new pantsuit she would never wear. He carefully tried to cover his tracks as he had planned for months. On January 17th, 1999, the jury returned with a verdict.
Mr. Foreman, has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes, Your Honor, we have.
Please rise.
Based on his brother's testimony, the blood evidence, and the recovered cooler, the once prominent lawyer and millionaire Thomas Capano was found guilty of first-degree murder.
We were able to reaffirm a lot of people's faith in the judicial system here. The system works. I think we accomplished justice here. I have a very good relationship with the Fahey family, and so I think we've not only been able to bring about justice, but we've brought as much comfort as they can have given the tragedy they had to suffer.
The jury went further, sentencing Capano to the gas chamber. It was the first time in Delaware history that a defendant had been found guilty in a capital crime without a body or a murder weapon. Capano now waits on death row pending appeals. In the summer of 1988, a wealthy Jackson, Mississippi woman disappeared from her home in broad daylight. The only clue left behind was a mysterious ransom note. The FBI and local police struggled to find answers in its cryptic message so they could find the kidnapper and retrieve the victim before her time ran out.
A daring kidnapping and a bizarre ransom note baffled Mississippi authorities. The victim was the wife of a wealthy businessman. A list of 12 names and a few drops of blood were the only clues to her fate. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The ransom note gave the FBI its first leads, But the case was not so clear-cut. Solving it required the keen insight of a criminal profiler and the perseverance of a family, local authorities, and the FBI.
"6 a.m., July 26, 1988. The heat of a midsummer day would soon bear down on the southern city of Jackson, Mississippi. Like every weekday for the past 48 years, Annie Laurie Hearin had coffee with her husband Robert before he left for work. As early investors in oil, the Heirins had become one of Mississippi's wealthiest couples, with a fortune estimated at more than $100 million. That day, Annie Laurie Hearin would host her bridge club at home, the same house where she raised 2 children and lived with her husband since they were newlyweds. By 3:30, Mrs. Hearin's bridge game was over and her friends had left. The housekeeper finished cleaning up after the card game and checked if Mrs. Hearin needed anything else. The 73-year-old woman said everything was fine. Annie Hearin planned to spend the rest of her afternoon reading until her husband returned. She wasn't expecting anyone, but perhaps one of the bridge players or the housekeeper had forgotten something. Her husband wasn't due home for an hour.
How are you, ma'am?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good. You got to see your husband. I have a letter.
I'm back to see him.
No, I'm not waiting at all. Let me
Annie Laurie Hearin was on her own. At about 4:30 that afternoon, Robert Hearin returned from work.
Annie, I'm home.
He saw that his wife wasn't home and figured she was out with her friends or daughter. When she hadn't returned by 5:30, he thought it was strange that his wife of 48 years hadn't called or left a note.
Annie.
The house seemed to be empty.
Annie.
Robert grew concerned and began calling family and friends.
Anywhere that I can tell.
No one had seen Annie since the bridge game.
Maybe we're going to have to do something else. Thank you.
Robert's son-in-law, who lived nearby, said he would be right over. The son-in-law said he and his wife hadn't heard from Mrs. Hearin that day.
Oh, right here.
Robert Hearin pointed out that when Annie left the house, she usually took her purse.
I've looked everywhere. I called,
But his wife's purse and shoes sat beside her reading chair. Her newspaper and glasses were nearby.
You know, we're just, I just don't know what to say.
Robert was worried since Mrs. Herrin's medicine for a chronic intestinal disease was still in the bathroom. She would need to take it soon or she would not be able to absorb food. The men continued to search for some indication of where she'd gone. A piece of paper near the front door caught the son-in-law's eye. It was a ransom note without specific instructions. Annie Laurie Hearin had been kidnapped.
We've got to do something real fast.
The note demanded that Robert Hearin pay 12 separate men before 10 days passed, but it didn't say how much or where to send the money. He was ordered not to call police, so he waited for a ransom call with instructions on getting his wife back. When none came by nightfall, he contacted the Jackson Police Department despite being warned not to. Officers secured the ransom note, hoping to keep any fingerprints intact. Processing the house for evidence, officers discovered a trace of what appeared to be blood on the front door frame. Laboratory tests would later reveal that it was blood and that it matched Mrs. Herrin's blood type. A Jackson police detective interviewed Robert Hearin. They wanted to know if he or his wife had ever been threatened.
I'd like to ask you a few questions.
He had no idea who would want to harm
It
them.
was there for me to find. It's a ransom.
If Mrs. Hearin were without her medication for long, her intestinal condition would become critical.
It was folded just like that.
Kidnapping is a crime that must be solved quickly, or the chances of rescuing the victim are slim. That evening, Jackson police contacted Special Agent Patrick McGlennon of the FBI's Jackson field office to bring the resources of the federal government to bear right away.
Under the federal kidnapping statute, the FBI has jurisdiction whenever an individual is kidnapped in the United States. The presumption in this case, of course, was a kidnapping had occurred, a ransom demand had been made, and the possibility of travel interstate is in fact why the FBI gets involved in these types of matters.
The FBI called U.S. Attorney James Tucker, who would advise investigators in legal matters as the case developed. Like most residents of Jackson, Tucker had great admiration for the Heirins.
Robert Hearin was a self-made man, and at the time of this incident, which was 1988, Mr. Hearin was probably considered one of the foremost financial wizards here in the Jackson area. He was well known in the business community. He was a generous person, so he was becoming well known for his particular acts of generosity.
By dawn the next day, FBI agents and evidence technicians arrived at the Heirins' home. The Jackson police detective filled in the case agent on what they'd learned so far. The FBI set up a satellite command post at the residence and tapped the Heirins' phone, ready to trace any ransom calls. There was little doubt that multi-millionaire Robert Hearin was the real target. Yet Mr. Hearin hadn't been told what to pay to get his wife back.
It was impossible to comply, or nearly impossible to comply, with the demands because they were nonspecific in nature. Mrs. Hearin was not even mentioned in the note. There was no provision for her safe return.
The note did say that the 12 men listed had been involved in the same photography company. Robert Hearin explained that he had once served as chairman of the board for that company. Some of the company's franchisees had been sued to recoup losses, but Hearin did not know which ones. It seemed unlikely that the 12 men named had kidnapped Mrs. Hearin. But perhaps one or more of them was striking back at the company through Robert Hearin. Technicians collected samples of all the writing pads and paper in the Heirins' home. They would compare the paper to the ransom note to see if it had been written on the stock from the house. The results would take a few days. Investigators searched outside the house for hairs, blood, clothing, anything that might reveal the kidnapper's identity. They looked for cigarette butts or evidence of food or drink, signs that someone had been watching the house. They found nothing.
Yesterday afternoon.
Neighbors and domestic workers reported seeing nothing strange at the house the previous afternoon, and no one had seen Mrs. Hearin leave.
Quiet neighborhood, we should.
The next day, agents continued canvassing the Heirins' neighborhood.
Dr. Posey?
They questioned a doctor who lived down the street.
Detective Johnson, Jackson Police Department would like to ask.
He said that he had seen something in the neighborhood recently that might be related to the kidnapping. 2 weeks earlier, the doctor was going to run errands when he drove past a white van parked near his house. From that position, anyone in the van would have a clear view of the Hearin house.
Around here?
Yeah, about 50 blocks.
At first, the doctor thought nothing of it. But when he'd returned home hours later, the van was still there. Thinking the driver needed help, the doctor offered his assistance.
Can I help you with anything? Wondering if you need some help.
The driver responded by asking if there was a law against parking in the neighborhood. It was an odd response, enough to make the doctor remember the incident.
Thank you, sir. If you think of anything else...
He said the van drove away minutes later.
Thank you, Dr. Coach.
Agents continued to canvass the Heirins' neighborhood and found another neighbor who had seen a white van on the street 3 months earlier.
The other neighbor had seen a van similar to that described by the first individual, sitting almost directly in front of the Hearin residence in the very earliest days of April of 1988. She was suspicious enough of the van to get the license plate number.
If investigators could find that van, they might also find Mrs. Hearin. But a computer check revealed that the license plate had been stolen from a car at the New Orleans airport. It was another dead end. After 36 hours of investigation and no ransom calls, agents hoped lab results on the note would provide a fresh lead to Mrs. Hearin or her abductor. FBI examiners first determined that the note had been typed on paper foreign to the Heirins' home. They also compared the typeface to known samples from every typewriter made in this century.
The laboratory division was able to determine that the demand letter was in fact typed by a Royal typewriter manufactured between 1912 and 1927. There was nothing else contained on the demand letter which would give analysts any type of ability to tell us the manufacturer of the paper or whether there were any indented writing or other evidence on the letter.
A latent fingerprint examination revealed nothing, and a spot on the note believed to be a bloodstain was too small to analyze. Although no evidence on the note helped agents, they hoped its message would. The note demanded that Robert Hearin pay 12 men who were involved with a photography company. Perhaps the kidnapper was among them. Agents learned that the company had foreclosed on each of the 12 men, all former franchisees, to collect heavy debts. One of the company's executives provided the FBI with company files and photos of those men.
Are you going to have to take those with you?
Yes, sir.
One was now deceased. The others were scattered throughout the country.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
At the FBI's Jackson field office, agents split up the 11 names and began to review the files and photographs. They sent leads to FBI offices in the towns and cities where the men currently lived, requesting additional information. Agents found that many had financial troubles. They tried to ascertain if those men had traveled near the Hearin neighborhood when the white van was spotted there, and again recently when the kidnapping occurred. FBI agents across the country began covert surveillance on the former franchisees. They hoped one of the men would lead them to the ailing 73-year-old woman. But as the kidnapping investigation stretched into its third day, only 7 days remained on the ransom note deadline, and agents still lacked instructions on how to recover Annie Laurie Hearin alive.
Hi, how are you, ma'am?
3 days had passed since Annie Laurie Hearin, an elderly grandmother, had been abducted from her Jackson, Mississippi home in broad daylight. The FBI continued surveillance on 11 men named in the ransom note found inside the Heirins' home. Agents couldn't confront the men. A frightened kidnapper might harm the victim. Special Agent Patrick McGlennon hoped one of them would lead to the missing woman.
We wanted to determine if they were traveling even small distances from their residences or business. We wanted to see if they perhaps were keeping Mrs. Hearin at a remote location where they might have to provide food, water, other conveniences for her, that they wouldn't want to be too far away from the victim.
Despite the efforts of dozens of agents around the country, They discovered no direct leads to Mrs. Hearin's whereabouts. But they still resisted contacting the 11 men directly so as not to reveal the investigation. The FBI considered the possibility that the kidnapper might be someone other than the men listed on the note. Agents contacted the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia for assistance. Profilers in the unit are agents trained to determine characteristics of criminals from the details of a case. One profiler reviewed the evidence, particularly the ransom note, looking for indications of the kidnapper's psychological makeup. The profiler called in his findings to the Jackson FBI agents working the Hearin kidnapping.
You mind if I put you on speakerphone so we can all listen at one time? All right, go ahead.
In the conference call, the profiler confirmed that the kidnapper was likely one of the 11 suspects currently under surveillance.
Here, which nobody else would ever use. So.
And since all those men had at least some college education, he believed one of them had intentionally misspelled words and used an old typewriter to throw off investigators.
He has a fixation.
The profiler said the abduction was an act of revenge against Robert Hearin by a paranoid individual who was willing to kill.
The Behavioral Science Unit believed that a sole perpetrator was responsible for this crime, that it would be a white male of approximate middle age, and that the individual would probably be working alone, although if they were working in concert with someone else, that person would provide a very subordinate role.
It's bad.
The profiler also concluded that by this time, there was only a 50% chance that Annie Hearin was still alive. One further detail caught the profiler's eye, a phrase that did not seem to match the rest of the note and might point to the profession of the kidnapper.
The note said, "Pay them whatever damages are owed to them. If any is dead, pay their children." Damages is a legal term. It was telling in that one of the individuals on that demand note was an attorney.
Special Agent Tom Montgomery of the FBI's Jacksonville, Florida office was called in to investigate the attorney listed on the note, a man named N. Alfred Winn.
After we received the name of N. Alfred Winn, we did the public record background checks. We also contacted the St. Petersburg Police Department, the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, found that he had no criminal record, did our own computer checks also. We determined that he was a St. Petersburg attorney and that he lived above his office.
Yeah. What's this all about?
Well, I'm investigating a crime.
An agent went to interview Winn at his office residence.
So, Mr. Winn, you were camping at the girl.
Alfred Winn said he had nothing to do with the kidnapping and explained where he was on July 26th, the day Mrs. Hearin went missing. He had been at a bar with a prostitute. He said that on that evening he had called his paralegal back at the office. He asked the employee to meet him at the bar to lend him $100 so he could go home with the prostitute. The paralegal promised to be right over. Winn said he and the prostitute went outside. He stalled for time as he waited for his paralegal to show up with the money. The two were in Winn's car when his assistant arrived. Winn took the money, then left with the prostitute. Winn said he didn't remember much about the evening. He didn't know the name of the bar or the prostitute's real name. The next day, agents checked the alibi with Winn's paralegal when the attorney was out of the office. He corroborated his boss's story and also claimed that he didn't know the bar's name since he had never been there before or since. Agents suspected both men were lying.
We learned that Winn had paid for the paralegal schooling at a local community college, his paralegal schooling. We had learned that he was working for basically a very minimum salary, and there was a lot of allegiance between the paralegal and Mr. Winn.
Later, an agent re-interviewed Winn's paralegal, explaining their suspicions. He maintained that he had met Winn at the bar on the same day of the kidnapping, though he did reveal something new about his boss. He said that Winn's legal battle with the photography company had begun when the company foreclosed on him 7 years earlier, and that he had fought the lawsuit with a vengeance. He had attempted to declare bankruptcy 3 times in order to avoid paying his debts. Under a court order to recover the money, the U.S. Marshal's Office had confiscated Winn's valuables, including 1,000 shares of expensive stock. They also impounded Winn's European sports coupe, a car the paralegal said Winn loved. In addition, they put his St. Petersburg office up for auction. On July 6, 1988, less than 3 weeks before Mrs. Hearin disappeared, Winn had been notified of an eviction hearing. But he had refused to leave. The paralegal said that Winn had been furious, believing that the photography company had ruined his life.
Going to get that date from me? You're going to check that date?
The FBI wondered if the paralegal had been involved in the kidnapping.
Okay. All right, thanks.
We pulled all vehicles registered to the paralegal, friends and associates of Mr. Winn, to include Mr. Winn, and learned that the paralegal had a white van registered to him, and through an interview of the paralegal learned that the vehicle was utilized by Winn on several occasions.
It seemed to be a major breakthrough in the case. The vehicle identification number revealed the name of the previous owner. An agent went to interview her.
You're right, it's just like you said.
He didn't return until...
She said Alfred Winn, not his paralegal, had been the actual buyer. She said that Winn had acted strangely. He was adamant that his name not be written on the title. So the woman left the line for the buyer's name blank. The lead was promising, but then agents learned that the van had been in the repair shop on the day of the kidnapping.
Okay, how long was he gone?
It was one more frustration in a difficult case. After more than a week, the FBI and U.S. Attorney James Tucker were no closer to finding Mrs. Hearin.
A case like this is extremely difficult when you don't have an eyewitness to any one of several situations. We did not have an eyewitness as to the abduction itself. We did not have an eyewitness that Newton Alfred Winn or any of the other people listed in the particular note had ever been in Mrs. Herin's company.
At the Jackson, Mississippi police station, investigators again met with the doctor who had seen a white van in the Herin's neighborhood.
Through those and see if there's anybody you recognize.
They hoped he could recognize the driver in a photo lineup.
Short here.
The neighbor quickly picked out the photo of Alfred Winn. He was certain it was Winn he saw reading a map in a white van across the street from his house in mid-July, less than 2 weeks before Mrs. Herin's abduction. The other neighbor, who had seen a similar van, also identified Winn as the driver. It was clear to agents that Alfred Winn was connected to the kidnapping of Annie Hearin, yet they didn't know how.
Thank you very much.
We thought, because of the positive identification, that Winn was definitely somehow involved in the kidnapping. If not the actual perpetrator, if not the man who walked up to the door and actually grabbed Mrs. Hearin, he certainly was directing or calling the shots.
Yep.
FBI agents kept Winn under surveillance. They believed that he could lead them to the missing woman. But as the deadline in the ransom note approached, hopes of finding the frail Mrs. Hearin dimmed further. The day after the deadline in a ransom note, FBI agents and local detectives briefed the husband of kidnapped Jackson, Mississippi socialite Annie Hearin in preparation for a televised appeal for his ailing wife's return.
We'll be able to do it. Okay, thank you.
The note hadn't outlined specific steps to earn Mrs. Heirin's release. FBI behavioral profilers hoped the press conference would prompt the kidnapper to contact Mr. Hearin with instructions to get his wife back unharmed. With his son and daughter at his side, Robert Hearin asked anyone with any information to come forward.
As a businessman,
he also spoke directly to the kidnapper, promising to follow any specific instructions. A week later, the plan seemed to have worked. On August 15th, 1988, Robert Hearin spotted the familiar handwriting of his wife among his mail. The envelope was postmarked August 12th from Atlanta, Georgia. Investigators were careful not to destroy any evidence that might have been left on it. Mr. Hearin believed the letter was in his wife's handwriting, too. FBI lab examiners later confirmed that it was. In the letter, Mrs. Hearin begged her husband to do what the kidnappers wanted, or they would seal her up in a cellar with only a few jugs of water. Though the letter provided no instructions on how to comply, for Special Agent Patrick McGlennon, it did bring new encouragement just when all hope of recovering Mrs. Hearin alive seemed lost.
When we received the August 15th letter, which was in Mrs. Heirin's handwriting, it really lifted the spirits of everybody that was involved in the case. We felt reasonably sure that she was in good enough condition to write the letter, and we were going to get her back the same way.
The letter itself had been dated August 10th, 15 days after the abduction. Yet no one could be sure Mrs. Hearin was alive on that date. It was unclear if she had written the letter on her own, or if the message was coerced, according to FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery.
Certain words utilized on the letter seal me up in the cellar with jugs of water. In talking to family members, we found out that those are not words that she would normally utilize. She would have used the word basement or bottles of water. So it is our belief that the letter was dictated to her.
If the letter had been dictated, both the message and the date could be false. Having to guess at what exactly he should do, Mr. Hearin wrote checks to all the men listed in the original ransom note, according to U.S. Attorney James Tucker.
He had already instructed his people to make efforts to determine what financial situations he had had with each of the people that were listed in the original note. So he had some idea at that particular point about how much money had been involved with each of those people.
Mr. Hearin settled on restitution, roughly equivalent to the amount the men had been ordered to pay in their franchise lawsuits. The total came to almost $1 million. Hearin sent $145,000 to the prime suspect, Alfred Winn. Enclosed with each check was a note requesting the safe return of his wife. The FBI instructed the Postal Service to deliver the envelopes the next day. Later, agents spoke with Winn's paralegal and learned of the attorney's reaction to Mr. Heirin's check.
When Mr. Winn received his check in Tampa, Florida, he opened it, read the contents of the letter from Mr. Hearin, turned to his paralegal and stated, "This is not what I wanted."
He told his paralegal that what he had wanted was to get his life back, the return of his confiscated car, jewelry, and other property. Winn sent back the check with a note enclosed, saying he hoped Mrs. Hearin would be returned safely. Agents now believed that Alfred Winn had kidnapped Mrs. Hearin for revenge against the photography company Hearin once chaired, not for monetary gain. That meant it was less likely Mrs. Hearin would ever be returned alive. Although some of the people receiving checks kept the money, most returned similar responses.
Some of the people that Mr. Hearin sent these checks to sent the checks immediately back to him, sent letters or called on the telephone, expressing their regret to Mr. Hearin that something like this could happen to his wife. They wanted nothing to do with the money, and they weren't going to benefit through his grief.
2.5 months passed without further word from Annie Hearin's kidnapper. Considering her fragile health, chances were slim she would survive this long. In early November 1988, the case was featured on a national crime-solving television series. Agents around the country chased each of hundreds of leads called in. One call from a woman in Florida seemed especially promising. Although none of the names on the ransom note had been broadcast, she said that if Alfred Winn were on the list, she had important information. The FBI learned that the Florida woman was a spiritual advisor, which did not initially bolster confidence among agents.
Special Agent Montgomery from the FBI. We spoke on the phone.
But after a brief interview, they realized she had a strong reputation in the law enforcement field, having often assisted police in the past.
I recognized some of the information that he...
The advisor told an agent she had first met N. Alfred Winn 4 years earlier. In 1984, he had his first consultation, asking her advice about problems he had with the head of a photography company, the same company mentioned in the Hearin ransom note.
She instructed him to pursue his problems through the court system and take legal means, and he told her that he had already done that. It just didn't work.
That's the big problem. That is the biggest
Winn
problem.
said he wanted to kidnap the head of the company and hold him hostage until he got what he wanted. He had the perfect place to put the man and said that he was looking for someone to help him. He called her a month and a half later to ask if she would help.
Besides, I can go without risking losing these clients. Trying to get new clients.
She declined.
It's tough too, but
The advisor provided the FBI with records of her work with Winn. Once assured agents would protect her, she agreed to become a cooperating witness and promised to contact Winn to arrange a meeting.
Anything else, or if you want to talk to me, if you want to think of anything at all that might be helpful, please give me a call.
FBI technicians would wire her office for sound and video.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Our plan was to draw Mr. Winn into a face-to-face meeting with her and to have them discuss their prior discussions of this kidnapping of Mr. Hearin, as well as any of the other things that would verify exactly what he had said to her during their prior meetings.
Alfred Winn took the bait. The monitored meeting took place in early December 1988. FBI agents watched as Winn approached the office. Agents hoped he would reveal the whereabouts of the missing woman. The advisor told Winn she had seen the crime show on television and asked if he had kidnapped Annie Hearin.
FBI one, can you hear him in there?
Winn denied it, adding that he had decided not to abduct Robert Hearin as he had previously discussed with the advisor. The recording corroborated the advisor's statement, but it didn't provide agents with the evidence needed to arrest Alfred Winn. When Winn left the office, FBI agents followed him.
We hoped a meeting between Mr. Winn and the psychic would lead him to, at the very least, check on the location of Mrs. Hearin's body or lead us to a co-conspirator.
But the suspect never went to visit a place where the body could have been kept. Weeks later, agents learned that Winn owned a cabin in Florida's swampland, a perfect place to hide a body. Dead or alive, agents hoped they'd find Annie Hearin there. They had no way of knowing if the house was booby-trapped or if someone was armed and waiting inside. 6 months after 73-year-old Annie Hearin was kidnapped in Mississippi, FBI agents hoped to find her in a remote Florida cabin owned by prime suspect Alfred Winn. A message from the kidnapper had threatened that the elderly woman would be sealed alive in a cellar. But agents found no cellar. The police was empty of anything related to the kidnapping. FBI Special Agent Patrick McGlennon and other investigators continued searching for the kidnapped woman nearby.
We began to look in dry cisterns, some swamp area adjacent to those properties, the outbuildings, screened porches, whatever structures existed. We found no sign of Mrs. Hearin, and no sign that anybody had ever stayed there for any length of time. Certainly no cellars. There were no cellars in that section of Florida.
Annie Hearin was still missing and presumed dead. Then, in late July of 1989, Alfred Winn sent a filing cabinet to the IRS, challenging them to find disputed financial documents.
All right, guys, we got the filing cabinet with it waiting on Winn from the IRS. That's good right here.
But he failed to check the cabinet thoroughly, and his arrogance would bring him down.
Winn, we believe, sent those thousands of documents to Internal Revenue Service as part of an effort to intimidate them into leaving him alone. That was a pattern that the agents discovered in regard to Winn conduct in a number of situations. His arrogance was demonstrated in his efforts to overpower whoever he was involved with at any particular point.
When they found letters regarding a kidnapping and murder plot, IRS agents called the FBI. The documents outlined how Winn and a former girlfriend had been planning to kidnap and kill the woman's husband. According to FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery, the similarities to Annie Herin's abduction were obvious.
They mentioned utilizing an old typewriter to type a communication, and the first ransom note for Annie Laurie Hearin was typed on an old 1920s vintage typewriter. They also mentioned detailed maps, surveillance of the area. They also mentioned that it was actually Winn that was going to do the crime, and the female was just going to help him and obtain what he needed.
FBI agents tracked down Winn's ex-girlfriend at the community college where she worked. They needed to question her about the plot outlined in the letters. At first, she claimed she knew nothing about the plot. But when reminded that interfering with an investigation was itself a crime, she decided to cooperate.
The last time you saw him was a few years ago?
She said the plot to kill her husband was Winn's idea. When she realized he was serious, she had broken up with Winn.
6 months ago. Mailed it from Miami?
Agents asked if she'd had any contact with him since then. She said that a year earlier, in early August 1988, Winn had asked her to meet him at a motel in DeLand, Florida. It was just days after Annie Hearin had been kidnapped. Winn acted paranoid, silently handing her a note that asked if her car was bugged and if she'd been followed. When he was convinced it was safe, he began talking.
What's this all about?
Winn asked her to mail a letter for him, offering her $500 plus travel expenses.
First of all, did I touch it?
She agreed, and he paid her half in advance, $250. Winn handed her an envelope wrapped in a gray linen napkin. Then he gave her very specific instructions. She was not to touch the envelope or even look at the address. Winn ordered her to mail it from Atlanta, buy the airline tickets under a false name, and fly into and out of 2 different airports. He instructed her to change her appearance before the trip. she complied, changing her clothes, jewelry, and hair in the women's restroom at the airport. Once in Atlanta, she was to mail the envelope precisely on August 11th. But the woman told agents it was late in the day when she made it to a mailbox. At the last moment, she said she couldn't resist a glance at the address. The letter, allegedly sent by Annie Hearin, was postmarked on August 12th from Atlanta. Agents showed the woman a photo of the envelope Robert Hearin had received. She immediately recognized the distinctive handwriting. It was the envelope she had mailed.
Do you have on this? I'd like to clarify.
She said that she had thrown away the napkin used to carry the envelope on a rural road.
Thank you.
She offered to take them there once she finished work. That evening, she brought the agents to the area. Investigators knew there was little chance they would find the napkin on the roadside after more than a year, but they looked anyway. They needed it to corroborate her story. Against all odds, they found it. But they wanted an admission in Alfred Winn's own words. With a solid cooperating witness, agents were getting closer to arresting Winn. At the FBI's request, Winn's ex-girlfriend agreed to be wired for an audio-tape meeting between herself and Winn.
We had hoped that Mr. Winn would discuss facets of the crime, that he would tell her what she had accomplished by sending the letter to the Hearin residence, that he would thank her for her help, that he would pay her.
The woman called Winn and set up a meeting. Agents had instructed her to try to draw Winn out about the trip to Atlanta. As hoped, Winn gave his ex-girlfriend the $250 he still owed her for mailing the envelope. Winn refused to talk in detail about his plan, and he never mentioned Annie Hearin. He seemed to have stonewalled investigators again. Convinced he was involved and desperate to find Mrs. Hearin, the FBI knew they had to arrest Winn soon. On March 11, 1989, the FBI was ready to arrest suspected kidnapper Alfred Winn. They set up a second meeting with Winn's former girlfriend who had begun cooperating with authorities. The ex-girlfriend had been wired so agents could record the conversation. They hoped Winn would say something incriminating about the kidnapping of Annie Hearin, so they could charge him and recover Mrs. Hearin or her body. FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery had coached the informant on how to deal with Winn in this crucial second meeting.
We had instructed her to become more aggressive in this meeting and to basically indicate to him that she was aware that she was involved in a criminal act, that she'd been watching television, and that she now realized that the letter that she mailed may in fact be involved in the kidnapping, may have been a second ransom note, hoping to elicit from him something to incriminate him further.
Agents watched and listened as the woman pushed Winn about the Hearin kidnapping. The suspect soon became defensive and left the car without admitting any knowledge of the crime.
Okay, pull it out. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
Agents knew it was time to make their move. The element of surprise is critical to a safe arrest. Alfred Winn was charged with conspiracy to kidnap, mailing a threatening communication, and perjury for testifying in front of a grand jury that he wasn't involved in the kidnapping.
Get in the car. Sit back and listen.
But agents still had no solid proof that he or an accomplice had in fact abducted Annie Hearin. In Winn's car, agents discovered several maps of Mississippi, one with a Jackson exit marked on it in pen and notes in the margin. Agents thought these might indicate where Mrs. Hearin's body had been placed, but extensive searches yielded nothing. Securing a warrant, Florida FBI agents searched Winn's office. They needed physical evidence to prove Winn was involved in the abduction of Annie Laurie Hearin. Their hopes rose when they spotted a vintage typewriter. Special Agent McGlennon recalled that FBI examiners had determined the ransom note was typed on a 1920s-era Royal typewriter, the exact model recovered from Winn's office.
This seemed to be a very significant break. In my mind, this was the typewriter upon which Winn typed the initial demand note that was left in the Hearin's home. We sent it to the lab, fully expecting them to come back with a report saying, this is the exact typewriter that composed that letter.
The FBI lab determined that the typewriter found in Winn's office was not the one used to type the ransom note. Agents believed Winn had planted a different typewriter to bring doubt to later prosecution. They had also found a business card for a van rental company in Winn's office.
How you doing?
The company owner said Alfred Winn had rented white vans 3 times.
I'm the manager. Okay.
Each time he had driven more than 500 miles, just 100 miles more than the round trip to the Hearin's residence.
Yes, I do, but I don't have a computer.
The rental times did not coincide with the date of the abduction, but one did match the date when Alfred Winn was sighted in the Hearin's neighborhood. U.S. Attorney James Tucker had little evidence to prove his case. He believed that Winn and his paralegal were lying about the suspect being with a prostitute on the day of the kidnapping.
We went back and confronted the paralegal with this false alibi. The agents and I had a heart-to-heart talk with him, at which he decided that he better tell us that all that was a lie, and that Mr. Winn had in fact been out of his law offices and out of pocket during the entire time that the abduction occurred, which would have been the crucial dates, the 24th through about the 28th.
This would help prove perjury, but it wasn't enough to charge Winn with the crime they were certain he had committed, the kidnapping and murder of Annie Laurie Hearin. The federal trial for conspiracy to kidnap began in Mississippi on January 29, 1990.
Throughout the investigation and the 2-week trial, which occurred in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Winn professed his innocence. But at the conclusion, a jury of his peers found him guilty for the crimes for which he was charged.
N. Alfred Winn received the maximum sentence allowed: 19 years and 7 months for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. He has no chance of parole from the federal prison in Coleman, Florida.
We have never to this day resolved where Mrs. Hearin is now, and the family deserves to know that. In fact, as far as this office is concerned, we still carry this as an open matter, and will continue to do so until such time as somebody steps forward and helps us out with locating where Mrs. Hearin is. Family deserves it.
Mr. Robert Hearin died of a heart attack on November 28, 1990. In May of 1991, Mrs. Annie Laurie Hearin was declared dead to allow the settlement of the couple's estate. The Hearin family still hopes to someday learn what happened to their mother, to begin to heal their pain, and to finally lay her to rest. For nearly 2 decades, a mathematical genius with delusions of single-handedly destroying industrial society planted or mailed powerful bombs to unsuspecting, innocent victims. It was a spree of mayhem that killed 3 and wounded over 2 dozen. In the largest and most expensive investigation in FBI history, agents spent 17 years hunting for the elusive terrorist known as the Unabomber.
The first bomb came in the spring of 1978. The damage it caused was minimal, but its impact would be enormous. With each new detonation, the bomber learned a little more about bombs, and law enforcement learned a little more about the man who sent them. Because its targets were universities and airlines, the FBI called him the Unabomber. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. Before we ever knew the name Ted Kaczynski, we knew we were dealing with a disgruntled genius. We just didn't know how smart or how angry he truly was, or how far he'd go. But while the Unabomber was carefully perfecting his bombs, we were refining our profile. It was all a matter of who would finish first.
On May 25, 1978, an engineering professor named Buckley Christ at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, appeared in the mailroom with a shoebox-sized parcel. Professor Christ was listed as the return addressee, and he didn't know the man it was addressed to. Campus security guard Terry Marker cracked, maybe it's a bomb. As bombs go, it wasn't much of one. It began a 20-year streak of violence that would stump the FBI and terrorize the nation. On November 15, 1979, American Airlines Flight 444 took off from Chicago, bound for Washington, D.C. As the Boeing 727 reached cruising altitude, the cabin filled with smoke. It was pandemonium. The plane was diverted to Dulles Airport in Virginia. A dozen people were treated for smoke inhalation. But for a faulty wire in the bomb, over 100 people would have been killed. Bombing an airliner is a federal offense. The FBI was called in. FBI agent Chris Ronay examined the evidence of the airline bomb.
It essentially was a wooden box that looked to be hand-fashioned, handmade. We found that it contained a barometric switch and some other initiating components, batteries, wires, and a container for the explosive charge. The barometric switch would function when the pressure changed in the baggage compartment sufficiently to close the switch or allow the barometric switch to function and then actually detonate the bomb.
The use of an altitude-sensitive barometric switch told the FBI that they were dealing with a serious and smart bomber. Ronay began his inquiries with the Chicago police. He was looking for anything to compare to the airline device. At Northwestern University, a thorough search uncovered the existence of two minor and seemingly unrelated incidents at the university. In addition to learning of the device that injured Terry Marker, Ronay learned of another. On May 9, 1979, another bomb had gone off at Northwestern University, seriously injuring graduate student John Harris. Its design was nearly identical to the first one. But since they were both relatively minor incidents, authorities at the time didn't connect the two. Dismissing those devices as amateurish pranks, the recovered debris was discarded. Working only from photographs, Chris Ronay concluded that all three bombs were the work of the same person.
There were construction techniques, the way the wood was cut, the way it was put together, the markings on the wood,
the way the tape was applied, that is evident in the photographs, was the same as in the previous cases.
The pipe bombs, placed inside wooden boxes, were all made of ordinary components: screws and nails and smokeless powder and black tape. The components were homemade and sanded to render them untraceable.
Certain components were not crafted as much as fondled and played with and looked at, and you could see they were handled and shaped and reshaped. And it just struck me that somebody spent an awful lot of time on this bomb enjoying putting it together.
The FBI realized they were dealing with a serial bomber, one that was passionate about his craft. In the 1950s, a shy, highly intelligent boy from suburban Illinois named Ted Kaczynski skipped a grade in elementary school. He was an introvert, preferring to withdraw into his room to study, especially to study chemistry. He was a prodigy with genius-level intelligence. His IQ topped 170. He entered Harvard at 16 and graduated in 3 years in 1962. In 5 years, he had received his doctorate from the University of Michigan. As an assistant professor of mathematics at the University of California, Berkeley, Kaczynski was not a popular or outgoing professor. Practically no one got to know him. In 1969, he abruptly resigned. The social nature of his teaching position was too much for Ted. He just didn't seem to fit in. By 1971, Kaczynski had decided to drop out of society completely. He bought an acre and a half of land in a rural area just outside of Lincoln, Montana, 6,000 feet above the society he had come to despise. He built a tiny 8 by 10 foot cabin with no electricity or running water. There he would sit by himself, reading and writing. One of the things Ted wrote was a 23-page essay raging against modern man's obsession with technological and scientific progress. Scientific research, he wrote, will inevitably result in the extinction of individual liberty. He sent a copy to his brother David. David read it and stuck it in a trunk where it sat for a quarter of a century. In June of 1978, Ted Kaczynski took a time out from his cabin to take a job working for his brother at a foam cutting plant in Illinois. Ted's bizarre behavior became too much. His brother was forced to fire him.
Ted, take it down.
Ted had insulted a female co-worker who had refused his advances. Ted seethed and within a year moved back to his cabin in Montana, vowing never to see his family again. Trying to fit in as a social being was too frustrating for the introverted genius. Ted withdrew even more, believing modern man incapable of understanding him. He was starting to see civil society as an obstacle that needed to be overcome. In time, Ted became acclimated to his life with few luxuries. He took it upon himself to grow his own food and to be otherwise self-sufficient. He had few acquaintances, opting for his own company in the Montana wilds. Ted rarely made it into Lincoln. When he did, it was usually to bury his face in reference books in the small-town library. On May 3rd, 1980, Ted Kaczynski rode his homemade bike into Lincoln. He wasn't going to the library this time. Instead, he caught a bus for Helena and checked into the Helena Park Hotel for a brief stay. The next day, he headed west. Ted had urgent business that needed tending to. Percy Wood, the president of United Airlines, received a parcel at his suburban Chicago home on June 10, 1980. A few days earlier, he received a letter from a stranger promising to mail him a book which, the letter said, had tremendous social significance. Wood placed the package on his kitchen counter. He opened and retrieved a book, Ice Brothers by Sloan Wilson. Wood was puzzled. Why is this book socially significant? He opened the cover. Wood was nearly killed. The bomber had upped the ante considerably with his fourth and most powerful device yet. FBI and ATF bomb technicians poured over the scene. It was quickly identified as the work of the serial bomber. Each bomb so far had been a pipe bomb with similar construction and wiring. On this, the fourth bomb, the bomber had left a calling card. Punched into a piece of rubble were the letters FC.
Certainly the initials FC were put in these bombs to be found, clearly protected in such a way that they would survive the blasts. It didn't make any sense to have it in there. It didn't function in any way. It served no purpose except to say, here's my signature, here's an identifying feature.
The FBI could only speculate what FC meant. By this time, FBI investigators had already given him a name. He bombed universities and airlines. They called him Unabomber, UN for university and A for airline. Naming him was easy. Finding him would be much, much more difficult. In 1981, with FC their best clue yet, the FBI cross-referenced thousands of people with those initials. But the Unabomber was not sitting idle. In October, a package was found sitting in a building at the University of Utah. It was a pipe bomb. Fortunately, it was a dud. Investigators now had a device intact. Perhaps a component was traceable. It would take time to find out. The Unabomber remained busy. In the spring of 1982, a package meant for Professor Leroy Wood Berenson blew up instead in the hands of an academic assistant at Vanderbilt University. The bomb was made of the usual materials, with the initials FC on the surviving wreckage. Examiners spent endless hours studying every minute detail of the Unabomber devices. The most bizarre clue suddenly emerged. The last two people specifically targeted were named Wood.
Wood played such an important role in every one of the bombs. I mean, it was present in every one of the bombs, even when it didn't need to be. He, in fact, if he didn't have wood in it, he threw wood in it, sticks of wood, just so they'd be there. There were references to wood in addresses and names of people throughout.
FBI lab examiner Doug Diedrich of the Trace Evidence Unit is also a wood expert.
Well, the materials may indicate something about that individual, may indicate where he might live, what he might do for a living. And that's one of the things that I was involved with, especially in trying to determine where these types of woods came from, what geographical area, what part of the country.
This approach seemed like a long shot, but the scarcity of clues left investigators with few options. As the FBI investigation intensified, so did the power of the Unabomber's devices. On July 2nd, 1982, Professor Diogenes Angelakos of the University of California, Berkeley, a devoted husband and a popular teacher, noticed a strange-looking object on the floor of the Computer Science Department's coffee room. The explosion seriously wounded him and tore off his fingers. As he lay dazed, he found a typewritten note. "Woo, it works. I told you it would. RV." The FBI ran down everyone in America named Wu, and everyone with the initials RV, a monumental, labor-intensive task, but to no avail.
This is the problem.
The note was a ruse.
She's going to have to do it over again. It's going to take how long?
Another lead surfaced the day following the blast. A custodian who worked in Corey Hall, the building where the bomb exploded, saw a man with a thin mustache and sweatshirt loitering in the hall the night before. The custodian, however, was unable to remember enough details to help a sketch artist make a composite. Angelakos was critically wounded, requiring a lengthy hospital stay. He was no longer able to care for his invalid wife. She died within a month of the blast. In May of 1985, in that same building, Berkeley graduate student John Hauser, a captain in the Air Force, noticed on the floor a 3-ring binder sitting on top of another object. Hauser had just applied for astronaut training. What he didn't know as he lay wounded was that he had already been accepted into the program. But he would never fly again. His Air Force Academy ring was found embedded in the wall across the room. Ironically, Professor Angelakos was nearby when the bomb exploded. He rushed to help Hauser. Unabomber-related crime scene investigations conducted by the FBI, ATF, and the United States Postal Service had become frustratingly routine. The recovered bomb components were packaged and sent to the FBI lab for future comparisons. Over the next few years, there would be many such examinations. On May 8, 1985, a package was received at the Boeing Corporation in Auburn, Washington. It was addressed only to the company, was heavy, and had too much postage.
Hey, Mark, look at this.
A suspicious mailroom employee called security. The package was X-rayed and shown to contain a pipe bomb. It had FC stamped into the end caps. Had the employee opened the package, it most likely would have killed him and anyone else nearby. On November 15, 1985, Dr. James McConnell, a psychology professor at the University of Michigan, received a letter and package from a Ralph C. Kloppenberg. The sender described himself as a doctoral student. "I'd like you to read this book," he wrote. "Everyone in your position should read this book." As he read, his assistant opened the package nearby. The explosion seriously injured the assistant and blew out the hearing of Dr. McConnell. Examiners continued to dissect the bombs. They were evolving as the Unabomber refined his craft. Exhaustive lab tests showed they were getting more sophisticated and more powerful. Agents were frustrated. They were making little progress in determining the identity of the Unabomber. and their analysis was confirming what they already knew. If the packages kept coming, it would only be a matter of time before someone was killed. Hugh Scruton owned the Rentec computer store in Sacramento, California. On December 11th, 1985, about lunchtime, Scruton headed out the back door that led to the rear parking lot when he noticed something. It looked like a block of wood with 4 nails sticking out, points up. The explosion was ferocious, blowing a massive gaping hole into Scruton's chest, exposing his heart. The Unabomber was now a murderer. The bomb that killed Hugh Scruton was the most powerful yet. It consisted of a pipe within a pipe and contained all of the same characteristics as the others, right down to the FC stamped on a surviving end cap. The Unabomber investigation was now officially a homicide case. Investigators stuck to their strategy of keeping the details of the case secret, lest the Unabomber learn what they knew, or worse, lest they encourage copycats. Agents were desperate for a solid lead. Ted Kaczynski was always active in his secluded cabin. When he wasn't making bombs, he was writing his philosophy that justified them. For Ted Kaczynski, technological society was a horror, defined by the Earth's destruction and human beings amounting to little more than mindless robots. In Ted's story, anyone who was participating in the human race's dependency on technology was a villain. On February 20th, 1987, a secretary at Cam's computer store in Salt Lake City looked out of her office window and caught a glimpse of a man in the parking lot, placing an object on the ground. An hour later, the store's owner, Gary Wright, was in the parking lot. He noticed the object on the ground. It was a block of wood with 4 nails sticking out, points up. Wright received serious injuries, but miraculously survived. As police scoured bus stations and local businesses looking for a suspect, a sketch was commissioned from the secretary's description. It was unquestionably the portrait of a man in disguise. The sketch didn't catch the Unabomber, but in one way it may have worked. Knowing he was seen, the Unabomber seemed to vanish. After 9 years of bombings, Unabomber-related incidents simply stopped after the 1987 Cams explosion. The investigation had continued, but all available leads had been exhausted. After 6 years of silence, investigators were hopeful that the Unabomber had either been imprisoned on some unrelated charge or died. Either way, the bombs had stopped. But Ted Kaczynski was neither dead nor in jail. He had spent the last 6 years virtually alone. Content in his day-to-day routine, tending the garden, hunting, writing, and visiting the library, Ted always managed to stay on top of current events. In 1993, after a 6-year hiatus, several highly publicized events propelled the Unabomber out of retirement. The fiery siege at Waco, Texas, between the ATF and the Branch Davidian religious cult, and the bombing of the World Trade Center created a violent political environment. The Unabomber would return in a fit of violence of his own. Dr. Charles Epstein is a renowned geneticist at the University of San Francisco. On June 22, 1993, he sat down at his kitchen table to open his mail, including a padded envelope which had arrived that day. The blast critically injured Dr. Epstein. After 2.5 hours of surgery, he was stabilized and very lucky to be alive. Two days later, on June 24th, Dr. David Galernter, a prominent computer scientist at Yale University, arrived early at his office to open his mail from the previous day. Injured in his right arm, eye, and abdomen, Galernter struggled to his feet and went out the door for help. The FBI quickly determined that the Epstein bomb and the Galernter bomb were identical. Pipe bombs filled with potassium chlorate and aluminum powder. Both devices had been placed inside a handcrafted wooden box. A few hours after the Galernter bomb went off, a letter was received in the mailroom of the New York Times. It was from a self-proclaimed anarchist group called FC, who were claiming responsibility for the recent bombings. FC promised more communications in the future. An identifying number was provided to the Times to ensure the authenticity of future communications. It was 553-25-4394. The FBI determined that the number was a Social Security number of a 20-year-old parolee in Northern California, incredibly with a tattoo on his arm reading "Pure Wood." An investigation quickly dismissed him as the Unabomber. Another major clue was discovered. Impressed into the paper on the New York Times letter was the faint notation, "Call Nathan R., Wednesday, 7 p.m." The elusive Unabomber finally provided agents with a solid lead. The FBI talked to over 10,000 people whose first name was Nathan and whose last name began with R. The exhaustive search turned up nothing. It seemed the Unabomber loved sending the FBI on wild goose chases. The Times ran the letter, which sparked public interest. It also drew the FBI into dozens of false leads. Disgruntled students, aircraft engineers, even a Dungeons and Dragons club in Chicago. The latest round of activity had sent the FBI investigation into overdrive. A Unabomb task force consisting of FBI, ATF, and postal inspectors was formed to coordinate investigative efforts. Jim Freeman was the head of the FBI's San Francisco field office. He would also head the multi-agency Unabomb task force.
We had evidence that was scattered around 3 different federal agencies and a lot of local state laboratories. So we recognized that our task was to gain control of the information that was already out there, determine what investigation had already been done. And we set about this by deciding to reinvestigate every Unabomb crime.
Every shred of physical evidence that remained from past Unabomber devices would be given to one forensic examiner. Special Agent Tom Monell of the FBI Laboratory's Materials and Devices Unit became the chief examiner for the investigation.
All the evidence in the Unabomb case, no matter if it was explosive related or not, came through me and my unit. In a serial bombing type case such as the Unabomb case, the most frustrating aspect was the fact that we were doing all forensic examinations that could possibly be done to the evidence, and it wasn't able to lead us to any individual.
While the task force struggled, Kaczynski's warped revolution against society continued. On December 10th, 1994, advertising executive Thomas Moser was opening his mail in his North Caldwell, New Jersey home. His wife and 2 daughters were upstairs. He examined a small package with excessive postage from an H.C. Wickel, Department of Economics, San Francisco State University. The explosion was the most gruesome yet. instantly decapitating Thomas Moser. With every previous device in the Unabomber investigation, Agent Monell was able to reconstruct a replica, working only from the debris recovered from the various crime scenes.
Signature of the Unabomber.
As with the 15 bombs he had reconstructed, this one was unquestionably the work of the Unabomber. A few months later, Ted Kaczynski prepared for an extended visit to the West Coast. This trip would be his busiest to date. On April 19, 1995, Ted Kaczynski was in the San Francisco Bay Area when Timothy McVeigh's 2,000-pound fuel oil bomb destroyed the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people. Ted would not let his agenda be eclipsed by the devastation in Oklahoma. The next day, April 20th, the nation still reeling over Oklahoma City, Kaczynski mailed 5 items, 4 letters, and a parcel. Within a few days, the mail arrived back east. First was a letter to the New York Times. FBI Special Agent Terry Turchie was second in command of the Unabomber task force.
In the letter to the New York Times, he mentioned that he was claiming responsibility for the attacks on Thomas Moser, Charles Epstein, and David Galerner. He also mentioned some of his goals and objectives and said that he was thinking of sending a manuscript or essay, and that he wanted them to consider publishing that essay. And if they did, he would make an agreement to cease committing terrorist acts.
The second letter received was to recent victim David Galerner at Yale, still recovering from his April wounding. The letter was taunting. Dr. Galerner, people with advanced degrees are not as smart as they think they are. If you'd had any brains, you would have realized that there are a lot of people out there who resent bitterly the way techno-nerds like you are changing the world. On April 25, 1995, a package arrived at the California Forestry Association addressed to its former president, William Dennison. Its current president, Gilbert Murray, decided to open it himself. It exploded with incredible violence, destroying everything in the office. Gil Murray was literally blown to pieces. 4 blocks away, the governor of California heard the blast from his office. The Unabomber scare was nationwide. Bomb threats were being reported everywhere. The FBI suspect list topped 50,000 names. 16 years and 16 bombs later, the Unabomber had claimed 3 lives and injured 24 people. 2 months after Murray was brutally killed, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. It read, "The terrorist group FC, called Unabomber by the FBI, is planning to blow up an airliner out of Los Angeles International Airport during the next 6 days."
The threat had to be taken absolutely seriously because the Unabomber had in fact placed a bomb aboard an aircraft before. It wasn't lethal enough to blow the plane out of the sky, but we knew that his bomb-making ability had progressed enough that he certainly was capable of that now.
The FBI saw to it that special security measures went into effect immediately at California airports. No one without a ticket was allowed through security. All bags were searched. Bomb-sniffing dogs checked everything. The Postal Service stopped flying the mail on commercial jets.
Passengers are questioned about carry-on luggage that they've had. Have you had this package in your custody and control during the entire time? Did you pack the suitcase yourself? Those type of questions all began from that day in LAX.
The same day that the airliner threat was received at the San Francisco Chronicle, the Washington Post received a message from FC, a 56-page typed manifesto. The New York Times received a carbon copy of the manifesto the next day, as did the adult magazine Penthouse 2 days after that. The letter to the Post and Times laid out the terms and conditions for publication and agreed to stop the bombings if the Post or the Times published. For Special Agent Terry Turchi and the Unabomber Task Force, receiving the manifesto was a huge break.
Of course, when the Unabomber manuscript came in, that was big information, and this was a major break, and we all knew that it was a major break, which if handled properly, could possibly lead us to identify the Unabomber.
The manuscript, blandly titled Industrial Society and Its Consequences, was a meticulously written tract against technology, genetics, leftism, conservatism, and modern society generally. The FBI had many items of evidence collected from years of investigating this case. They needed to generate just one solid lead, one that could hopefully break the case wide open. Freeman thought the answer lay in publishing the manifesto.
We very much were in favor of publishing it because after reading the manifesto, it was clear that someone had put their philosophy that had evolved over a number of years within the pages of this thing. It was recognizable. Somebody in reading this, we hoped, would read it and say, I remember that guy. He was sat next to me in class at such and such a university.
After some public soul-searching and discussions with the director of the FBI and Attorney General Janet Reno, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, the decision was made to publish the manifesto. The manifesto appeared in a special section of the Post on September 19, 1995. By early 1996, Ted Kaczynski's brother David had been doing some soul-searching of his own. The news reports that the Unabomber had connections to Chicago, their boyhood home, as well as to Berkeley and Salt Lake City, nagged at him. He got a copy of the manifesto and began reading. He read it in the hopes of erasing the idea that his brother was a killer. What he read sent chills down his spine. He recognized the language and content of the manifesto as being similar to that of writings by his brother Ted. David dug up as many old letters and writings of Ted's as he could find and compared them to the Unabomber manifesto. Both had employed the unique phrase, cool-headed logician. David was distressed, but not yet convinced. He wrote Ted an urgent letter. Though he did not reveal his suspicions, he requested a visit to Montana. Ted refused his brother's request. David decided to call a private investigator to look into the matter, but the news that the private eye brought him was not encouraging. The private eye submitted the manifesto along with some of Ted's writing to be analyzed by experts who didn't know the parties involved. The experts concluded that the authors had a strong chance of being the same person. Frantically, David continued his search for anything Ted had ever written to him. In an old trunk, he came across the essay Ted had sent him back in 1971. David could no longer hide from the reality that his brother might be the Unabomber. David Kaczynski was stunned. The 1971 essay David had unearthed was eerily similar to the Unabomber manifesto. Torn by the prospect of turning in his own brother on the one hand and endangering lives on the other, David Kaczynski made a gut-wrenching decision. Through his attorney, he contacted the FBI about his brother. In February of 1996, David Kaczynski told task force members of his suspicions. He gave a detailed accounting of Ted's life, where he grew up, where he went to school, and where he now lived. He then turned over the 1971 essay.
And then we were able to do a side-by-side comparison between that document that was prepared many years before to the current copy of the manifesto, and it was very clear to us, many of us in the task force, that the similarities were more than coincidental.
The FBI analyzed the essay and found over 160 examples of similarities with the Unabomber manifesto, including common phrases and misspellings. The list went on and on. After 17 years, the FBI had its first major suspect, Ted Kaczynski. Dozens of FBI agents quietly slipped into the small town of Lincoln, Montana. The FBI kept careful surveillance on Kaczynski's cabin as they laid out the case for a search warrant, hoping that the Unabomber would not strike again in the interim. By the beginning of April, enough information had been uncovered to justify the warrant. Among other things, agents were able to learn that Ted had traveled extensively. Hotel records showed that he was always on the move immediately preceding a Unabomber event. Agent Terry Turchi submitted a meticulous 65-page affidavit outlining the government's case against Ted Kaczynski and requesting permission to search his cabin.
We had been working all morning since about 5 that morning to pre-position various agent teams in different locations in the woods in Lincoln, Montana, and at a forward command post that we had established in Lincoln. Everybody had a different role. We had also had the evidence response teams coming in, and they were staging at another command post that we had in Lincoln. So everyone was ready to go once the warrant was signed.
Disguised FBI agents and a forest officer approached Kaczynski's cabin. They walked toward his cabin speaking loudly. They didn't want Kaczynski to suspect there was anybody sneaking up on him. The officers asked him to help identify a property line on their map. As he turned to get his coat, the officers pounced on Kaczynski. The suspected Unabomber was in custody. Kaczynski was immediately taken for questioning to a temporary forward command post. Jim Freeman was about to come face to face with the man that had eluded the FBI for nearly 2 decades.
He looked just absolutely disheveled. He looked like he was covered with soot. The agents that had grabbed his arms to restrain him had soot on their hands.
So, Ted, you like to travel?
Kaczynski admitted nothing and refused to say whether the cabin had any live bombs in it. As the questioning continued, the search of the cabin began. The tiny cabin was treated essentially like a live bomb. It was assumed that the place at the very least had live bombs in it, or at worst was heavily booby-trapped. Explosive ordnance disposal teams cautiously made their way into the cabin. Ted Kaczynski had not been formally arrested on any charges yet. As investigators searched through his cabin, they found enough evidence to charge him with possession of bomb-making materials. They found pipes, chemicals, wiring, batteries, and wooden boxes. This charge would allow agents to hold Kaczynski until a more thorough search could be conducted. FBI Special Agent and explosive expert Donald Sockleben was responsible for quickly gathering evidence in order to obtain the arrest warrant. He rushed to Helena to petition the judge. Sockleben had been working on the Unabomber case for years.
I think it was on the ride back to Helena that night when Pat Webb and I, who had worked on this for so many years, just sort of looked at each other and realized that maybe this was the beginning of the end. That we really did believe that night, if we hadn't believed before, that we had in fact caught the Unabomber.
Ted Kaczynski was detained overnight until formal arrest charges could be brought the following morning. He was led through the streets on national television, looking every bit the part of an eccentric hermit. He was presented the next day before a judge in Helena on a charge of possession of bomb-making equipment. The search of the cabin continued. The room was a gold mine, but a dangerous one. Each container, each book, Each binder needed to be x-rayed for explosive devices. It was clearly going to take a long time to search the tiny cabin. The evidence being slowly hauled out of the cabin was damning. A series of 3-ring binders with page after page of detailed bomb designs which matched the bombs used in many of the Unabomber explosions. Explosive powders of the type used in the bombings. Aluminum ingots and aluminum shavings on the floor, crucial bomb components. There was the infamous hooded sweatshirt and sunglasses. Agent Thomas Monell, the expert on Unabomber devices, was also inside the cabin.
The other evidence located in the cabin were electrical components and wire that were consistent with the majority of the Unabomber devices. We found a improvised or a homemade flip type switch that was literally identical to 3 switches that were used in earlier bombs.
After almost 2 full days, the search came to a sudden stop. A package was found. It was wrapped like previous bombs with a return address on it. All it awaited was a victim's name and address for the front. It was x-rayed and determined to be a live pipe bomb. Special Agent Sockleben had to handle the crisis.
Well, from the x-ray, it looked very similar to the last bomb that had been placed, the one that killed Mr. Murray in Sacramento. We were able to safely remove the box from the cabin and take it down the hill to where we set up a site to deal with the bomb.
The search slowly continued in the days ahead, and more damning evidence was seized. In addition to bomb-making paraphernalia and chemicals, agents also seized letters, notes, diagrams, and the Unabomber manifesto. One irrefutable link between Ted Kaczynski and the Unabomber remained: the typewriter used for the manifesto.
The typewriter that had been used to type the manifesto wasn't found until literally the last day of the search, which took 4 or 5 days. It was literally in the bottom of the last box that was opened.
It had taken 11 days to search an 80-square-foot room, but the FBI's careful approach had paid off. The man who had killed, maimed, and ruined lives, all the while taunting the FBI, was caught stone cold. On April 14th, the entire cabin was hoisted onto a flatbed and hauled away for further examination. The charges against Kaczynski had been upgraded. On June 18, 1996, Ted Kaczynski was indicted in Sacramento on 10 counts relating to Unabomber activities. 1 charge in the death of Hugh Scruton, 3 charges in the wounding of Charles Epstein, 3 charges in the maiming of David Gelernter, and 3 charges in the death of Gil Murray. That day would have been Gil Murray's 48th birthday. New Jersey authorities filed more charges for the death of Thomas Moser. On November 12, 1996, selected visitors filed into a Sacramento courtroom for the long-awaited trial of Ted Kaczynski. In the front row was Ted's family, brother David, and his mother, Wanda Kaczynski. As Ted entered the courtroom, he turned his back angrily on his family members and never acknowledged them. Opening statements were about to begin when Kaczynski stood up and said he wanted to change lawyers. After a few days, the judge ruled that Kaczynski would have to undergo psychological testing. Federal prison psychiatrist Dr. Sally Johnson spent many days with Kaczynski. She concluded that Ted Kaczynski was mentally ill, but was competent to stand trial. The government's case against Kaczynski was overwhelming. For 17 years, the FBI had prepared for this day. Examiners had reconstructed and preserved every device related to the Unabomber's crimes. With Ted Kaczynski's arrest, they were now able to establish an irrefutable link between him and the Unabomber. Ted's desire for solitude would no longer be self-imposed. With no options, he pled guilty to all Unabomber-related crimes. He was given 4 life sentences plus 30 years, he would never be eligible for parole. For Agent Terry Turchi, the Unabomber investigation shows the FBI's determination to never quit until justice is served, no matter how long it takes.
For the people committing these crimes, who may go on for many years and not get caught, they may become more arrogant, or they may become more complacent, or they may think we're never going to catch them. But I think for them and for the public, the message has to be that we don't give up, and that we're going to stay with it until we solve it. And certainly I think that is what we're called upon to do and what we need to do.
In June 1998, Joanna Lee, an assistant editor at Simon & Schuster Publishing, received a letter from Ted Kaczynski with a prison return address. She knew he was the convicted Unabomber, but opened it anyway. Kaczynski wanted them to publish a book about his struggle. To this date, there are no takers.